Hello, and welcome to Scuttlebutt, the War Movie Review Podcast. We're happy to have you with us as we take a look at films from the dawn of cinema to today. We aim to provide a raw and unapologetic review of each film's cinematography, historical accuracy, and delivery. In the process of analysis, certain details will be revealed. These spoilers are only divulged to ensure a fair assessment of each film. We head back to the trenches this week with Howard Hawks' 1941 epic Sgt.York. As always, I'm joined by Mike A.
Hey, hey.
Mike B.
Yep.
Nate.
Don't fuck up.
And award-winning writer, historian, and professor, James Gregory.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, man, thanks for coming back on due to technical issues. But anyway, so what do you guys think?
I just want to start out by saying I was the one that fucked this last one up. We had recorded this podcast months ago, and it was long, but it was good.
It's amazing.
And I fucked it up because my stuff stopped recording halfway through.
Okay, so we're actually putting our cards on the table and saying that this is a re-review of this.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes. Because we've talked about for the last how many months, 3 months, we've talked about Sgt.York, Pusha.
It's true.
You know, we were hinting at the fact that we had done it or we were going to do it, and then the inside jokes became too prevalent, so we couldn't ignore it. So we had admitted to the fact that we had lost the episode. But Brian had, the first time James was on, had flubbed this, I think, almost 6 times, straight.
James is our first real guest,
rough.
so.
Yeah, and it was hilarious because I think we were all just dying laughing at this point.
Well, also we could probably more pinpoint it and make it more entertaining for the listeners. To be honest, last time
we were all over the place the first time,
and so but we can make it a little bit. I think we can make this a little bit better. So take 2, it's all
take
good.
2, and we can do the push again.
The push.
Oh, definitely.
But anyway, so James, you know a little bit about Sgt.York, right?
I mean, just the little bits and pieces you get from the movie, I guess.
Like that scene where he's gobbling like a turkey. That's a great one.
Yeah, I have a little bit of experience with his story, though. I think now, since the last time we filmed this, I can officially announce these things, so that works out for us. Mm-hmm. But December 19th, my book will officially be published. So,
and what's that book about,
University.
James?
Oh, well, great. So happy you asked, Mike. The title, maybe the title will help you. I think even you can figure this one out. Right. Unraveling the Myth of Sergeant Alvin York, the Other 16. All right. It's a big story. Texas A&M University Press is publishing it, and talking about the fact that the story of Alvin York is just a big fat myth. There's not really much truth at all to the matter, and it's exactly why you have me here to talk about this movie that is right at the heart of my discussion.
Correct.
In the book.
Well, that's the thing is exactly. It's
Well, this movie invented a lot of those myths too, right?
Yeah, definitely. Or at least it cemented,
perpetuated.
These
I would use the word perpetuated.
Well, perpetuate would be fair enough, but my argument is that this movie, it cements it. Some of these things were made up by authors before the movie in the 20s and in the 30s. And when the movie came out, anything that goes on the silver screen tends to cement ideas in people's brains about the true story. It's kind of like, Hacksaw Ridge, right?
Yep.
That whole scene of the court-martial, and he never was court-martialed. So people that only saw the movie think, oh, he was court-martialed, what a guy. But that's not what happened. It was the same thing with this movie. People still quote it to me. Oh, well, you're wrong. I've seen the movie, and that's not what happened.
That's not a good argument. And I've heard that one many times too.
I mean, Sgt.York didn't sit on top of a mountain and God talked to him through scripture, and he just fucking.
Well, that's the difference between the top people and the bottomland people.
And that's when my eyes woke up, because that's when I woke up again from watching this movie, because I literally fell asleep again watching this movie because it was.
Yeah, it's God tells him about how great America is, and how.
Yeah, of course.
Well, eminent domain. We must go to the Philippines.
No, the movie's great for a lot of the perspectives because when I wrote the book, I have a whole chapter dedicated to the movie, and I used a lot of the archives from Warner Brothers, And there's another book, Michael Birdwell, who just passed away. His book, Celluloid Soldiers, has got a couple chapters on it. And the reality is they made up most of these religious scenes at the beginning just to kind of make him less of a radical Christian. They wanted to temper some of his religious views, which is why you have these scenes. So there a lot of the scenes are even made up to try to make Americans.
So he was more of a religious radical.
So that tampers him down because that tampers him up in my view.
No. The movie is tampered down, and that is a fact. I mean, the screenwriters even write about this in their letters to each other. They tampered down his religion.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about that because I don't think we talked about that before.
No, we didn't. No.
So that's So if you would care to elucidate.
Sure. No, the movie originally, when it was going to be made, when they finally convinced York to do it, he wanted it to be more about his life and not the war. He didn't want to make it more about the war, and they kept pushing him, and they finally convinced him that we need to talk about the war in the middle point, but he wanted it to be about his religious conversion and his Bible school and the work after the war, right? But that's boring to people. So he finally gets convinced to do it. But I mean, you got to remember, he's very religious to the point of ad nauseum. I mean, he's annoyingly religious, and they have to temper it when doing so because they kind of leave out little facts like. At least 2, I know for sure, almost 3, but positively twice, he tried to get out of the draft for being a conscientious objector, right? It wasn't just one. He got the report, they said no, and he resubmitted it.
Right, in the film, it's one
Return
to
time.
sender.
Yeah.
It's one. Yeah, no, he kept trying to get out of it.
Yeah.
And then the idea of him talking with Buxton and getting a leave home, no, that never happened. That was made up for the movie, and his discussion with Buxton about his religion, that was made up to temper his views. They tried to make it, he's just, kind of a misinterpretation. He's a country bumpkin, and he doesn't really understand the greater context. But that never happened. That conversation never happened. He was just set in his ways. And there's even discussion by some of the men that, like, he annoyed the shit out of them. His religiosity and constant, basically not wanting to be there, just really annoyed him. So yeah, the movie is they actually tempered it way down.
So when you're talking about like he didn't want to be there, like from your research, how strong was that feeling with him?
I mean, pretty. Like I said, he tried to get out of it. They said no. He tried to get out of it again.
Yep.
They said no. So obviously strong enough to push it. But since we can pause and do whatever, let me grab Michael Birdwell's book and I'll find the exact sentence. Yeah, pause. I might actually. Yeah, I did bookmark some of it for this conversation. So
is that Celluloid Soldiers you're talking about?
Yeah, this is Celluloid Soldiers.
I'll look into that. Sounds like an interesting book.
And Birdwell was the curator for the Alvin York papers. So, like, if there's anyone in this world that's an expert on Alvin York, it was Michael Birdwell. But he died of cancer earlier this year. But I think he wrote a book on York, and it's supposed to be published, but I don't know the details. I know it's in here. Like I said, I took lots of notes.
Take your time, man.
I like to put my thing. I like to put the thing and put it on my eye, and I like to put the shooting. Like
that gives me balance.
It gives me balance.
But from what you're saying, James, though, is that in reality he was more like the sniper character in Saving Private Ryan with the religious shit than he was like how Harry's portrayed, which is interesting. So instead of gobbling, who should have been just like Hail Mary, full of grace.
Yeah, pretty much.
This one's for Ezekiel.
Yeah.
Ezekiel.
Well, hey, fucking. Unfortunately, Coolio died. That's gonna date this. But so Amish fucking paradise is in everybody's.
Okay, wait, hold on, wait. So I want to dive into our conversation earlier today. You said you wrote Amish in Paradise. Were you being absolutely
totally,
serious
Sean didn't know
to
the
me?
fuck what we're talking about. So.
Okay, so you said Amish Paradise
as a joke
because Sean wouldn't understand.
Yep.
Okay. I was gonna say because if you actually thought he wrote Amish Paradise and not Gangsta
I know
Paradise,
that,
I was
Nate.
going to have a
I'm
freaking
cultured
meltdown.
in R&B, and that Sean is not. So.
Right, yeah. Well, I don't know Sean's,
I think
response
Gangsta's
to that.
Paradise won a Grammy.
Yeah, it did.
It won.
Yeah.
It
It
won
did,
something.
yeah.
Didn't
I
it?
didn't know about the Keenan and
like
Kel thing, though.
96.
You didn't know about
No.
Keenan and Kel? You didn't know the whole theme song for
No,
that?
I saw one great.
I don't know that.
I saw one
Yeah.
great thing about it though, and they were like, people don't understand how great Coolio is. He made the most epic gangster rap ever without swearing or cussing, and no guns, no nothing. Like this generation of rappers has nothing on him. Like it's very interesting.
Yeah, Mike, if you look up Keenan and Kel's theme song, he's the guy in the middle doing everything on that.
Jesus Christ, I used to watch Keenan and Kel.
I've ever watched it, but I don't remember the theme song. Keenan and Kel was great. Like,
Yeah.
I'm so
I
glad
found
that
it.
I found that so far.
So if we want to, you want to start from here?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay,
I can do magic. Don't worry, just talk.
I mean, York's religious experience in the movie was changed quite a bit because they were afraid he was going to be too religiously fanatic. So in this, like I said, Michael Birdwell's book, he says that they had to handle it carefully. Not only the death of his friend or the death of his enemy and his conversion to Christianity, because for him, York made the mistake of saying once in an interview that when he converted, it was like being struck by lightning. So they first had that into the script, but they started changing it. York hated it. He wanted more things to be showing his conversion, but York's religion posed other problems. Even though press releases informed the public that profits from the picture were earmarked for the creation of his Bible school, the religious issue would not abate because York constantly invoked God's name and assured everyone that the movie would be a testament to Christian values. And he argued that faith was essential to his story, but the PCA forbade the use of God's name in motion pictures. So, even the screenwriters informed Jesse Lasky, the producer, that we recognize that if York's real religious attitude is included in the picture, there is great danger of his appearing to be merely a religious fanatic, and thus lose heavily in audience understanding and sympathy. So now the screenwriters had to change it so he wasn't so religious. And so, as Michael Birdwell says, to solve this dilemma, they opted for a balance between godliness and patriotism as a representation of true Americanism. So they realized this should not be a war picture, but that they really need to play up the war angle in light of what's going on in Europe in order to not focus so much on York's religion. And so two of the major things that they added into the movie made two major alterations in the script. They invented that scene on the rifle range where he proves his prowess as a marksman, and they made up the scene where Major Buxton presents York with an American history textbook and help him decide whether or not to fight. Although this scene never happened in real life, it significantly tempered the perception of York as a religious fanatic. So that whole part of it, written in black and white here from the best historian on Alvin York, that they tempered it to make him not so religious.
Let me get this straight. All of this basically can be compressed into this is propaganda.
Yeah. Well, I mean, technically this movie, when it came out, was pushed by the U.S. Senate for being propaganda. So they pulled it after a month. There was a hearing about it, and Warner Brothers trying to produce propaganda. And then Pearl Harbor happened, and so obviously the court case fell through, and then they re-released it the next year.
Weird.
Of course,
Weird.
yeah.
So religion is hard, but this movie is technically not as bad as he was.
It's interesting that you bring this up because it sounds like they chose a character that people knew from the First World War, like, oh, it's Sgt. York, that guy that won the Medal of Honor. Mm-hmm. But he was a very problematic individual. And they really had to make this guy that's kind of famous fit into this mold. Because we're looking at it, post 41, post the movie. But in that period from 1919, to say to 2041, 22 years, he's just this kind of obscure guy. Hey, he won that medal. So it's interesting how they had to be they were talking to each other saying, we have to fucking make this guy marketable.
Well, he also had this issue with interventionism too, where he thought that we shouldn't get into the war.
Oh,
and then Jesse Lasky, and then they basically convinced him that we should join the war, and then he becomes a spokesperson for joining the war. But he had interventionist ideas. So even at that moment, he's a figure in the public saying we shouldn't go to war.
Kind of like Lindbergh.
Yeah.
I can't remember what we talked about last time in specific detail, but did they ever take this film and then push it for then war drive afterwards?
No, so yes, they did. So once the war starts, they no longer have to play the game like, oh, we're not a war movie, we're just making a true film. And actually, they went so far as to, after the movie, the U.S. Army recruited in the movie theaters. So when you left, the U.S. Army gave out packets.
That's what I remember we talked about. Yeah,
they gave out information packets about the Army in these like Alvin York souvenir folders. So the movie was used for pure propaganda.
I think it won an Oscar too, didn't it, or something?
It did. Oh, Gary Cooper did. He won for Best Actor.
So we're talking about we're I'm glad how we're kind of like, at first, before we get into the battle stuff, we're kind of just covering the actual York compared to how he is in the movie. And James, one thing that's, and all you guys obviously probably notice this too, is that the character of York in the film is like this, mountain man with this like Appalachian accent, and everyone in there is like that. I have to ask, was the real York anything like that?
No, you can go get on YouTube and watch videos of Alvin York speaking. Like, for a man who didn't really have a formal education, he did not sound like a country bumpkin. I mean, he had an accent, right? But and by the 40s, he's practiced enough that when you go watch the videos, I mean, he sounds nothing like someone that comes out of, the Appalachian Mountains. But that was actually made up when his book came out in 1928. Thomas Scahill added in that whole mountain dialect and really overstated it. But no, that is not how York actually sounded. So even that's part of the myth that all entails it.
I actually, just not too long ago, I was looking up. You can find like bloopers and stuff like that from movies way back in like the 30s and 40s on YouTube. And I was watching one of movies from the 40s, and all of a sudden one of Sgt.York popped in there, and it's Gary Cooper, and he's doing the scene where he has like the plow and he's talking to that guy, and he keeps flubbing up his line. Then finally he just goes, "This goddamn accent."
Yeah.
So
and it never existed. It's such a weird thing to add.
Right. But it's just funny that, like, clearly that wasn't his choice, Gary Cooper. That was like something that's like, no, York must sound this way in the movie. So that's just weird.
No, it's well, and part of the people that always argue for this movie, York was on set and he really, geared the movie to where he wanted it. That's not true at all. In fact, he did have full control over it. He could veto it after the whole thing was done, but he didn't like being there. So he was never on set. York was never there. So he had no say in how the movie was made, despite some people claiming that, he was there in the scene and he cried. Or no, he wasn't there. So it's just the Warner Brothers screenwriters using various sources that they thought were the best. So basically they used Tom Scahill's book as a source.
Okay.
Yeah. So and that's where the accent comes from. That's where a lot of the conversion and the battle stuff comes from. It all comes from Thomas Scahill's 1928 book, which that in itself was supposed to be using Alvin York's diary, but he just conveniently cut out all the conscientious objecting stuff, and then all the times Alvin York lies or is wrong about his own history because he wrote it later. So it all is just BS built on BS, and then put on the silver screen.
Well, it's a very obvious movie of its time. It's not a lot of subtleness to it.
Yeah.
No, not at all.
That late
not
30s.
at all. But it is what it is. And I think we all agree that a lot of it's a boring movie until you get to the battle stuff.
Which we should get into the battle stuff. We should get into the battle stuff because.
Well, before you get into it, you got to mention your favorite character since he shows up in the training.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Just as important.
Yeah. Pusher.
Right.
The push. Yeah.
Oh yeah. All Pusher being put in.
Yeah. So Pusher. Apparently, you told me that Pusher was created so Alvin York didn't look so stupid.
Let me quote Michael Birdwell, right?
Okay.
The expert on Alvin York.
Okay.
Pusher depicted a non-existent relationship between York and his former army comrades. Let me see. Oh, York had alienated himself from many of the men in his battalion because of his attempt at conscientious objection and his religious beliefs. Then, when they had to make the movie, they had to say, well, we don't want this man to look like an idiot, So they added Pusher in purely for that scene about the stupid subway where he's like, "Oh, I've never been on a subway before." They added Pusher in so that he didn't sound like an idiot. That's the only reason he's there.
So yeah, it's basically take a New York caricature and make him dumber than York or sound dumber.
And you put him in there, and he's the one who tells York about the subway. Because when he comes back, he's in New York City, and they're like, "What do you want to do?" And he's like, "I've never been on a subway." And they're like, "You an idiot? What were you, from the hills of Tennessee?" But that's why Pusher gets invented. And the same thing with, they have Bernard Early as his drill sergeant who hates him for being so religious. But that never happened either. Right? Early was never a drill sergeant. He was never even a sergeant. So they just add in stuff.
Also,
to really
drill sergeants didn't
York
exist then. But hey.
Yeah. Well, and that's none of these things are added to the story. They're just designed to make York like this sympathetic hillbilly, and we should feel bad.
While we're on it, wasn't York never a sergeant as well? He was a corporal during the whole
No,
action?
well, no. He was never a corporal. He was later promoted to sergeant, but everyone calls him Corporal York or the newly appointed corporal. He was never a corporal. He was a private first class. He was just an acting corporal for a little bit. And so I don't know where people got that stupid. I mean, it was Mastriano. It was in the book. The newly appointed corporal. He was never a corporal, ever. It's in his file. And even after the War Department put out a memo that said, any mention to the name Corporal York is erroneous. Remove it. All right. So even the War Department had to come in and say, no, he was never a corporal, yet it still exists to this day.
Wow.
Funny.
But that is an interesting part though, when the actual training happens, and then we start to kind of see World War I seeping into everything, and then the him basically having to be converted by his, I don't know, converted, but convinced by his, who is it that he's his captain or something like that?
Buxton's the one they make up. And okay. I mean, Buxton's great. He's as far as a person, I mean, he was the unit historian, but they add in that scene with Buxton.
It's so stupid.
How do I clean on this grease off? How do I clean off this Springfield? I don't want too much grease on it.
So you do a better Pusher than I do. So yeah.
I doubt it.
If you really think about it, think of just the idea of why would York be such an important soldier out of the entire division that they go through all this effort to keep him?
Yeah,
that's so stupid.
That's a good point. Why do they give a fuck if he's well, let's pull Alvin York aside. Let me tell you about this here United States, son.
Yeah, let's make sure he can go home. Not everybody else, but he can go home.
Fast track.
And then come back, right?
Yeah, there he goes. There's the thumb. Yeah.
It gives me bowings.
Give me bowings. Oh my eye. Oh my
eye. Oh, you hit me on my eye. Oh my god.
It's all stupid. And I love the fact that they're really bad at even getting the 82nd, because the 82nd's made up of this conglomeration of troops, and there's a ton of immigrants.
That's
in
the
that
crazy
unit.
thing.
Even
the
it was also the
even
82nd
the men,
was as you know, James, the 82nd was made up of all the shit bags that no other unit
American.
wanted.
Well, it's draftees because originally the 82nd was going to be in the South, and they originally created it out of Georgia.
Yep.
And then they took all the men, all the enlisted men, or all the draftees, and filled as replacements, which left a bunch of officers that are from the South. And then they pulled in troops from the Northeast.
Yep.
And then they pulled in from the Midwest.
Oh, we're the All-American.
Why you say
we're all American? Yep. But the issue, with Early, right, Bernard Early, he's an Irish immigrant. He immigrated to the United States just not even a decade before the war, and yet there's no accent, there's no attempt to call this, and even his unit. Yeah, well, and even with the unit, right? The 17 men, the other 16. I mean, 3 of them are Italian, 3 of them are Polish. No, 3 are Irish, 3 are Polish, and 2 are Italian. And I mean immigrants, they immigrated from those countries.
They're Gen
they
Zero.
were not born in the U.S. They barely, they know English, but not well.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the people in the 82nd couldn't speak English, and that's nowhere in the movie. I mean, God forbid we show immigrants being just as good as Alvin York, but they leave that.
That would have helped in the Second World War, because that didn't happen then either, right?
Mm-hmm.
Weird.
But it's they could have at least done it, because most of these guys are learning. Camp Gordon had an English school, so that the troops could learn English.
Yeah, but if it's done by the military, especially the army, it's not going to be good.
Yeah, well, some English is better
it's
than
like
none.
the
At least you know how to follow orders.
It's just but like no, that's something that like especially the First World War that people just kind of gloss over is, dude, you've got literal not even first gen, you've got Gen 0 immigrants that were from whatever country they came from that put on a fucking uniform and were trying to speak English and trying to fight for the U.S. in the First World War, and it's like so. Really quick, and then we'll come back very quick, I promise. The Lost Battalion, that A&E show from the early 2000s. They tried to show that, but they didn't get it right. They had guys with New York accents. They had the one guy with the Polish accent, blah, blah. But it's like, no, in World War One, like especially with the 80s, like a lot of the American Army, or I'm sorry, the U.S. What the fuck was the name? They had a different term for the drafty divisions, which the 82nd was one of them.
National Army.
National Army. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yep. So, so the National Army troops, a lot of them were immigrants. I mean, a lot. Yeah. And it's not just the 82nd; it's like the fucking other divisions that are around that. And you had a lot of National Guard divisions that were made from guys that were here for 1 or 2 or 3 generations. Blah blah blah. They were quote unquote Americans, And then you get into the draft, right? The National Army guys. And the 82nd was a perfect example of a division that was made up of all these draftees from all over the fucking U.S. Mostly, like you just said, the Northeast, because it's like, you got a lot of immigrants coming in here. Okay. Kind of like in the Civil War. Hey, you want to be an American? Go fight for your country. Kind of like that mentality. It wasn't like exactly like that, but like, you know what I'm saying? It's like, and so the 82nd was like made up of guys from all the fuck over, and that's why, the All-American.
Yeah, and you get them all, but they don't get the representation of it. And which actually, when my book passed through the publisher, that was one of the responses was, this is a moment to like actually talk about the fact that these men are not, quote unquote Americans. These are immigrants that have been marginalized in the story. All these years and left out.
Yep.
But I mean, you got to think the officers above York, they were Irish,
right.
You've got all these men that just immigrated and they're on top, which is really counter to York. I mean, York's their position, and it's on all the history books about kind of they're the last bastion of pure Americanism because they're like their accents closer to the British accents from the original settlers, and there's this big discussion on race and racism with like Alvin York and those people that come out of that area, and so to have a unit made up of all these immigrants and a period of like extreme nativism in the country, it's remarkable that one, I mean, it makes sense they didn't include it, but like there's a lot of dynamics happening in that unit that never get discussed.
Yeah, right. And that's the thing is like, so really quick before we get into the combat part of it about the movie and everything, do you think if that film was made today that it could be portrayed better?
I think they could. I mean, if that movie had to be made today, it should not be called Sgt.York.
Right. Yeah.
But if it was made today,
that story.
I mean, they would definitely
PFC
bring
York,
in actors. Yeah. PFC York. They would have to, account for the fact that these men are Italian. Hell, there's one guy who was Native American in the unit, and he was the first of his tribe to be killed in the war because he was one of the 6 killed during that fight.
Yep.
But it's like these men never get, and even in the movie, Early is the only one they mention his name, and there's one scene after they capture the prisoners where he says, Cutting, Kornacki, and whoever the other name was. He says they're 3 men. He says their last names. That's it. That is the entirety of acknowledging that there were other men in that patrol.
That's a good point. Yes, exactly. And,
so I think they should, and honestly, I mean, they should make a book out of my movie. It'd make a great one.
You make a movie out of your book?
Nudge.
Yeah,
wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Make a movie, wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
But I think it's all just built on it, and that the basic training scene sets that up with not only a bunch of BS, your stupid pusher character, Early being this hateful York, you idiot, you conscientious objector, go dig a ditch.
Right.
But you also, it sets up York as like, I'm the master marksman, and he, that whole, he's at the shooting range and he hits the bullseye over and over and he keeps licking his stupid sight, right? And it's like, oh, York's the greatest. And then he goes back to the barracks and all the guys are like, oh, tell us how you did that. And he's like, well, I used to hunt turkeys. And then the turkeys come around and I shoot them back to
You
front.
hunt turkeys with a rifle, too. Like, that's how you do it.
And they add those scenes in. Those are made up for later.
Yep.
But in doing that, they leave out the fact that, like, Alvin York was not the marksman of the unit. And in fact, like Percy Beardsley, he grown up in the woods, and he was a very good
right?
marksman. Yeah, he was from Roxbury, Connecticut. He grew up on a farm, and he was a great marksman. And so this idea that, like, because York grew up in the woods, he's better than everybody else, it makes no sense, because he wasn't the only one. Right?
Well,
I mean, sure, most of these guys come from like small towns or the New York City, so they probably never held a gun before.
What do you mean?
But
Pusher was a dead-eye dick on his fucking, subway. You know?
Yeah.
It's like,
Of course.
think of all the fucking... He shot Capone when he was in the city.
Yeah, of course. You throw all these things together. You create that myth that, like, oh, Alvin York is definitely the best because he's a marksman. And it's fair. I mean, like, I don't know, I grew up in southern Oklahoma, in the woods, hunting all my life. And my younger brother, when he joined the Air Force, he scored absolutely perfect on his qualifications.
That's
because we'd grown up shooting guns.
I'm not going to make that
joke. It doesn't matter.
I'm not going to make that joke on here. But the Air Force,
like, it happens. That's true.
Yes.
Yeah, I know. But the fact that it was like expert, he missed no shots.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Right.
Yep.
But it's like, and you can credit that to sure he had longer, experience with shooting rifles than most of the other guys in his unit. But it doesn't automatically mean he's the greatest.
No, because
right,
like,
the whole point of training is to make you a good shot.
Right. And I think we did this in the last one that I fucked up. But like, when I was in basic, like there was 5 guys in my platoon that got expert, myself included, and 3 of those guys are from cities and never held a gun before. Okay.
Right.
That does not mean that you're an expert marksman just because you've hunted and you've done all this shit your entire life. It's like I had experience, so I got the flow, and the AR was like, wow, this has no recoil compared to a rifle, like a like a Remington 700 or some shit. And I'm like, oh, this is fucking fun. And then, but the 3 guys or something like that, they're from the cities, and I'm like, yeah, so that does not a marksman make your experience, shooting military rifles, because like again, you might have been good on a shotgun, hunting game to get your family fed. I get that. A rifle's a completely different fucking weapon. And
well, if you notice, they always show York like firing flintlocks.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
So it's like, so you're telling us that somehow his flintlock capabilities are translating perfectly well.
Something,
the only thing that could translate from that is not flinching when you actually squeeze the trigger.
True.
I was gonna say that'd be the only thing that could
That's
be,
it.
and it would have to be, maybe a flintlock would be a prime example of that.
But that's it. Yeah.
Yeah. One thing in there is the stupid wet in the sights, the front sight.
Wet in the sights, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, doesn't a flintlock? Don't they not have front sights?
No, they did do.
They might have a bead.
Okay.
Yeah.
Percussion and flintlock have a bead, I believe.
Some of them have blades
depending on the model.
What's
I
it
think
called? The barleycorn front sight or something?
Which
traditional term?
Yeah, I think if I remember correctly, a percussion rifle normally has a blade or a fin.
Okay.
Even a lot of flintlocks, like Kentucky or Pennsylvania long rifles, they would have a blade on the front, and they'd have a rear sight.
Okay.
But that's again a lot of
Still
money.
Doesn't translate to
no, it's a lot of money.
Still doesn't
too.
translate
like,
well. Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
I get it. I don't understand.
Yeah, no, and so for him,
times.
also here's a little tiny detail that we'll go into really quick before we get into the comment part of it is the 1917 rifle has aperture sights. Okay, it's a very long fucking
You mean they
axis.
didn't use O3s like in the movie?
We're not talking about the 03.
The 82nd. Well, yeah, Brian knows that. It's sarcastic. But,
Does our audience?
but no,
know that?
so the 82nd was equipped with 1917 rifles.
I'm going to clean all the gosmoine off my rifle.
That fucking radius, that sight radius, is very long. But if you're used to looking,
Well,
through,
only for a bit. Only for a bit, if we're being fair.
What?
Because they were with the British for the first half, so they were learning British rifles.
Yeah, but they
and
got
then
their
they switched to the
17s back.
1917 service rifles.
Yeah, then they got them back
after.
So it's like, yeah, learning V-notch, which I'm sure York probably did great on the V-notch because that's what he's probably familiar with. And then, but the 1917 has got an aperture sight on it, and it's like this guy just picking up this new kind of sight that he's never probably used in his life and just being a fucking ace with it. I mean, what are we doing here?
It's like he picked up a fucking, whatever the Glock was that had a crazy, caseless ammunition or whatever. I might be getting it wrong, from the 80s or something. It's like, oh, you go from the 1700s to now.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like,
and you know how to do it. Yeah,
you should be an ace.
Horse and buggy to a Ford Mustang. Yeah, that's great.
Right. And then front sight.
If you wet the front sight, it helps in the mud, when you're in the Somme, like totally, the movie depicts. Yeah. The Argonne Forest has somehow been completely deforested and is now the Somme.
It looks like Verdun, yeah.
The backlot of Warner Brothers.
Very shiny so we can see it. Yeah. Anyway.
But it does lead us into it. I mean, just the fact that they finally put him on the front lines and, and there are actually accounts of York people in the unit hating him. In fact, some of the men in the 40s write a letter being like, we fucking hated him. He was a coward. And there was one, they claim there was this one instance where York was like, I don't want to be here. I want to go home. And they threatened to shoot him if he didn't shut the hell up.
Wow.
All right. And now that could have just been made up later, but who knows?
Right. Take trying to knock down the glory boy.
So take it with a grain of salt. But there was evidence that the men in the unit didn't like him.
So you're
because of his religiosity.
You're saying that an accurate remake of this would be called Everybody Hates York.
Yeah. Like Hacksaw Ridge, but less bullshit.
Right, yeah.
Deborah.
Deborah,
ma.
Exactly.
And so from your research, James, I know you get the extremes of he was a fucking religious zealot and then, people hated him and all that. Realistically, would he just be one of those guys that's just doing the bare fucking minimum because he doesn't want to be there, but still does it?
I mean, it's the only way to ever really say, because you got to think, these guys were in combat before, which the movie skips. I mean, they were a part of the San Miguel offensive.
Yeah.
And so these guys had experience in combat. They've already become experienced, and so by the time we get to the Argonne, I'm sure that things have changed out a bit. My research, unfortunately, there's nowhere to say it. There's no one keeping a diary. Being
of course,
York was an idiot today. But you also have to remember that York did have a past, and he was a bit of a hellraiser, and it was a violent past. And so when the battle actually happens, the stuff that, York putting a gun to the back of a German's head and tell him to go or I'm going to blow your brains out. Absolutely, I believe that happened. Mm-hmm. I mean, he did have a violent past.
Well, and also
in
people,
moment,
even if they don't have a violent past, people are capable of doing that.
True. Right. So I think he did it. I mean, he did his job in the moment. That can't be argued.
No.
He did his job when it counted. Now, anything before, I can't speak to because I just know some of these accounts. And again, you have to take it with a grain of salt. But the reality of his personality after the war does, reflect a bit on how he would have been during the war. He wanted to get out. He was a conscientious objector.
No, I get that. Yeah.
And he's drafted in. So, those things are up to debate. But I mean, in the end, he did his job when he needed to.
That's okay. So here's the thing: that's what we're going to preface this with, because people are listening. They're going to be like, "Oh, you're just hating on him." Whatever. Blah, blah, blah. No, he did his fucking job. He was there. That's the thing. There were 17 guys. Yeah, well,
I've always argued with my book with people. It's like the other 16 would not have made it out of that ravine without York.
Correct.
But York would not have made it out of that ravine if it weren't for the other men.
That's how it goes. That's how it goes.
Single-handed bullshit where York defeated the German army by himself while everyone else was pissing in the bushes.
Right.
No, that didn't happen.
No. It was a collaborative effort, and then that's how the infantry works. It always has worked, and that's how it does work today.
You mean York Patrol doesn't mean just York? There's other people there?
Yeah, exactly. And I hate that fucking name. Like James Nelson's book, The York Patrol, he wasn't even in fucking charge.
Wow.
Early was. It should be called the Early Patrol, if anything.
That's a worse name than Sergeant York.
Yeah, the York Patrol. No, it was Sergeant Early. He was in charge of the patrol. It should be the Early Patrol, right? But
that's because it's early in the morning, right?
Well, that
too. I was going to make that joke. Fuck you.
Fuck you.
But it's like, if we look at the movie,
you beat me to it.
Mm-hmm. What happens? York and the men are at the Somme. Apparently, there's giant holes. The trees are all gone. It's muddy, and the Germans are entrenched on the hills. And they push forward, and then we need to go this way. Early, take a group, and he takes his men, and then somehow they run into a trench which there were no trench networks in the Argonne. I mean, this was the back end.
No,
there was no time.
The
to
trench
do
networks that
forest.
were there, the quote unquote trench, were like 3 feet deep. They were hasty.
Yeah,
trenches.
and even in the book, if you read the books on Alvin York, he says we went into a trench. Well, in reality, what they went into was an irrigation ditch.
Yeah,
that was there from the Middle Ages, right? So they in the movie
fucking feudal farmer
they enter
was
this
planning ahead, you know.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing. That actually, where they were in the Middle Ages, there was a monastery nearby, near Châtel-Chery, and so the ravine they went into used to be the water source. There was a dam there.
Oh, okay.
But on the way in, in the movie, they're in a German trench, and all of a sudden they run into this line of Germans and hand-to-hand combat in this trench. They're beating these Germans with shovels and everything. And then they kill all the Germans and they keep moving. Of course, that never happened. There was none of that.
It turns into All Quiet on the Western Front. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. No, that never happened. And then they move on and they get to that ravine and which is weird. They come over a hill and they see all the Germans, right? And then they open fire on the Germans. And that's how the movie shows it. But they're in a forest.
Well, what actually happened? Walk the listeners through what actually happened. Yeah.
So if we're walking through what actually happened, right? The morning of October 8th, it is foggy. It's rained, and the men of the 328th Regiment, 82nd Division, are about to move in or attack the German lines, and they're coming out of Châtel-Chery. And after advancing a little bit, they are inundated with machine gun fire from several flanks. Their commanding officer, Kirby Stewart, he gets killed, and it passes to Sergeant Harry Parsons, and he's like, well, I don't know what to do, so let's send a suicide mission. And he declares that Early should take a patrol and try to outflank these machine guns. So Early gets assigned 16 other men, with York included. And the way this thing really goes, you've got acting Sergeant Early, and then you've got acting Corporal William Cutting, which is how he is in the movie and in the books, but his real name is Otis Merrithew. So you have acting Corporal Otis Merrithew and leading his group. You have Corporal Murray Savage leading his group. And then you have acting Corporal Alvin York leading a show squad, right? So Alvin York has 3 men with him. And 2 of them are ammunition bearers. And then you have Percy Beardsley carrying a show automatic rifle, right? And so Bernie Early takes the men, they go south, they manage to get through the woods quietly using the fog as cover. They come around the hill and they get to a creek and they see 2 Germans at the creek and they chase them. And the Germans retreat and run back, and the Americans end up running upon a German unit who had just arrived and are eating breakfast, basically. They line up and they open fire. And in opening fire, the Germans, surrender, they kill a few, and they capture them. Capture about 80 or so, line them up, start taking their weapons away, getting them ready to go. And as Early's about to say, all right, let's get out of here, some Bavarian sappers further up the slope noticed them and opened fire. There were no 35 machine guns. There were no machine guns spinning around from the top of the hill.
Right.
There was just a squad of Bavarian sappers who were on their way to reinforce a unit, saw them, lined up, opened fire. And in doing so, the German prisoners all dropped to the ground. 6 of the Americans are killed fairly quickly. Bernie Early is shot 3 or 4 times, and he goes down. And he passes control of the unit to Otis Merrithew and says, Merrithew, take over. Merrithew fires. He gets shot in the left arm, pulls out his revolver, and continues to fight. York is farthest to the right because they had a show, so they were ordered by Early to get to a better position to watch the prisoners. And so York is in the most advantageous position because he's closer to the bottom of the slope, and so they can't really see him. So he's behind a tree. Just beside him is Percy Beardsley with a show firing an automatic rifle, and there's 16 men, 6 are killed. So there are 10 other men either watching the prisoners or fighting back. And in 15 minutes, this battle's over. The officer they captured at the beginning convinces the sappers on the hill to surrender, and they all get them together. And then Merrithew orders York to lead the column out of there. And then they take the Germans, and on their way out, they capture a few more machine gun nests. And then they go rejoin the Americans, who have already advanced, right? Some of the stories say that York's actions helped save the day because it allowed them to advance. That's bullshit. The Americans had already advanced up to the point where they were in line with each other. So they get out of there, and then York, as they're leading the men back, Merrithew is wounded, who's now in charge. Bernie Early is being carried on a stretcher by German prisoners. Mario Musi's been wounded. Patrick Donahue's been wounded. So they all get evacuated out, and then Alvin York just happens to be the last non-commissioned officer, even albeit an acting one, in charge, and so he gets credit for the capture of 132 Germans, right? And that's what happens. It's as the movie, which we'll talk about now, the movie shows this man by himself knocking out like 3 machine guns and capturing all these Germans, and everyone else just pissed their pants and hid. But the reality is, you have 10 Americans engaged in a firefight in a tiny ravine, outnumbered, right? Yeah. Almost damn near 10 to 1.
Yep.
Right? And yet they managed to capture all these men. But York gets the credit in the end. And that's the truth of what
happened. And that's where it starts.
That's the start, yeah. Yep. And then, of course, everything builds on there.
Yeah.
But, I mean, that's the true battle. So now if we take that
and compare it to the film,
to the movie,
yeah, it's
you get a totally different standard. Because once they make it once they make it into that ravine, of course, there's no trees in sight.
It's not a forest.
They make it into the forest is gone again. Yeah. Yes. They open fire, and then, shit goes down.
There is one moment that is kind of like what really happened. There's a part where they I believe anyway, there's a part where they like take prisoners, and then one of the Germans says everyone get down, and then machine guns open up on top. That kind of resembles the real thing in a way.
Well, if you fast forward 5 seconds after that scene, right, York's firing his rifle, he starts. And if you look in the background, they've got some of the Americans firing back, right? That is the only moment of close to reality, which is even funnier as a mistake from the filmmakers. Because in that scene, you can see other American soldiers behind York firing their rifles. And then when they fast forward towards the end of the movie, where they do the investigation, they say, well, there are no other casings, so York must have been the only man firing his gun. And it's like they just showed the scene of Americans firing, and now they're completely countering this. So I don't know if that was a mistake on the filmmaker part, but
probably
that part even further creates that single-handed myth of Alvin York.
Yeah, absolutely.
But please, I want to hear your ideas on how the battle unfolds with the turkey gobbles and all.
Yeah, it's fascinating to hear the real story, and I know that it took you a long time to piece all that together. I mean, real research takes years, And
this book has been in 4 years.
Thank you so much for presenting
4 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, of course. 4 years is how long I've worked on it, and even that battle, just that chapter, took at least 6-7 months to piece it together.
Oh, I bet, and it's just, you got to take all the hearsay out of it. And
James also has physical evidence, which really helps.
Yeah, well, and that's the other thing is you've got, later down the road in the 2000s, you have 2 teams that claim to found it. You have Douglas Mastriano, which his relic hunt should never be considered archaeology, who is basing his research on Taylor Beatty and a picture of a tree he found in the 90s. Because he's special forces, and so the way they would have gone is this way. If you read the fucking history, it tells you how they went. And so another team led by Dr. Tom Nolan, they read the histories, they looked at the research, and the key point between their two, Mastriano apparently believes that bodies just don't matter, and so he never considers the grave registration files. But Nolan's team did go look at the grave registration. Where are the bodies? If you find the bodies, you find the fight, because they were buried where they fell.
Yeah.
And his team finds they find evidence of the graves, and it proves they were correct. So Mastriano's team puts them way the hell up here, 800 meters in the wrong spot. But Dr. Tom Nolan's team goes and actually does real archaeology. They have archaeologists. They GIS every piece of material they find. Mm-hmm. And when you lay it out on a map, it fits perfectly to the battle. The bodies, the evidence of American artifacts fit absolutely perfectly with the grave registration description of the grave locations.
And the original photos
casings
that you got later.
Yeah, and the original photos match the terrain, and the casings.
Yep.
They found a bunch of fired American 30-06 in that ravine, which showed there's not just York. He's not running tree to tree the Patriot style, shooting from every different tree with his rifle. Yeah. Right?
He didn't have like 14 M17s he set there the morning of in the fog.
Yeah, yeah. And all the other men just reloaded them for him so he could run up and
You mean he didn't
up.
have his kids behind the other trees?
Yeah, exactly.
So one thing, James,
actually, it was his guardian angel. To keep
I know you've already done this before, but like, describe the 1917, the 45 slugs that you guys found and analyzed.
Right. So and that's the other thing with, the story is that York, when he ran out of ammo, pulled out his 45 and fired away at the Germans. And when they did the excavations, there is this issue. There is an issue with the 45 casings. In 1919, when they went back for the investigation, there's evidence in the early stories and the archaeology that they had like a shooting contest with Alvin York. So there's just this massive pile of like 45 and 9mm casings. And then they found artifacts full of bullet holes. And I mean, like 45 and 9mm next to each other, obviously showing there was a shooting contest. So those got mixed into the site. But the 30-06, you can prove are each other's. But anyway, when they found the 45 casings, they found 45 here, which they kind of assumed was Alvin York because there was intermixed with 30-06. And then a little bit near him, they found more 45 casings. And when they put them all together and they sent them not only to the Tennessee Bureau of TBI, but it's like the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation.
Yeah.
They analyzed it, did forensics, and found that they came out of different guns. And then they sent it to Douglas Scott, the historian who's famous for the Little Bighorn excavation, to the forensics there. And when he tested them, he also confirmed that these casings came out of different guns. And some of them came out of revolver, not a 1911. So it's proof that York wasn't the only one. And then if you do the research, you'll find accounts that Percy Beardsley says, yeah, my show ran out of ammo or it jammed. And so he pulled out his 45 and fired away alongside York.
To make it clear for our listeners, Alvin York had a 1911.
Mm-hmm. Percy Beardsley had a 1911.
Oh, Percy Beardsley had a 1911.
So there were only 5 men that would have had sidearm.
Yes, let's get into
Alvin
that.
York.
Yep.
Yeah, so you've got Alvin York, who was the squad leader of the show.
Yep.
You've got Percy Beardsley because show gunners carried a sidearm. You've got Otis Merrithew because he was acting platoon leader.
Mm-hmm.
You have Bernard Early because he's the commanding officer. Mm-hmm. And then you've got Murray Savage. So we've got 5 men who would have had sidearms. Murray Savage, dead. Bernie Early, severely wounded. So we mark those 2 out of it. That leaves us with 3 options. Well, we know that Alvin York had a 1911. And then I found a photo of Percy Beardsley after the war showing off his 1911 that he carried through the war. Mm-hmm. And you look at Otis Merrithew's reports, he says the word revolver. He doesn't say pistol. He says revolver. Mm-hmm. And when they did the archaeology, when they did the forensics, several of them had no drag marks, which means it was fired out of a revolver because it wasn't ejected. So there's no mark from the ejection. So the evidence even proved that Otis Merrithew had a revolver. And so you put all that together, Alvin York was not the only 45 firing in that ravine that day. Right? So that myth goes out the door too. So not only do you have 30-06 casings found all over the site, showing the locations of the different men and proving they were in the fight. You also find expended stripper clips that show they had to reload.
Did they find on Merrithew's site? Did they find the Half Moon clips still attached to the casings?
So they didn't find any Half Moon clips. Mm-hmm. But again, the soil and the erosion. Those
Half Moon clips are steel, anyway. And the brass erodes a lot slower than steel does. Yeah.
Right. So the steel, a lot of it was gone.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So even if they had, but they did find some, 8mm to prove there was a show. They even found the remains of an empty show magazine.
Yes.
To prove that.
Yeah.
That
he went through at least
Beardsley
one
did
magazine.
In fact.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was,
and if it jammed or something.
So that was something I wanted to comment because unfortunately, due to a lot of myths, the show gets a bad rap. The original show in 8mm was amazing and it was really good. The only real issue it had was, me and James talked about this, was that when you shot it a lot, because it was basically designed off of a very early shotgun automatic action, that I can really get into it, but long story short, there's 2 tubes, and one is an inner tube, and one is an outer tube. And due to thermal dynamics and stuff, the inner tube eventually would get hot enough where it would expand and it would lock up. And on a show, it was probably about 200 to 300 rounds where this would happen. And guys would talk about these guns seizing. You'd set it against a tree, and like 5 minutes later, you hear clunk, and the gun would have cooled down enough where the bolt would slam home again.
I'll explain to you. I'll explain, Brian, to the listeners. The show has a reciprocating barrel that's surrounded by a shroud of very thin sheet metal to cool it down and protect it. When that barrel expands, it also expands the shroud, and then blah blah blah. It does not allow the barrel to reciprocate, and therefore the action does not cycle until it's cooled down.
In military terms.
Right. Well, and even that, that's a lot.
No, I want to make it. I want to
get mine out of the safe and I'll go look at it. And I'll make sure I'm
works,
explaining
but not
it the
so
right
much
way.
with this actual battle, because if you think about it, they're not firing 300 rounds. He's in a ravine.
Wasn't there an actual warning though? Where like
there was. So that's part of it.
Yeah.
But again, they've had time to get through the woods and cool off. But either way, what I believe happened, since they only found the one, and his ammunition bearers were both killed.
Yeah.
And so they found 8mm ammunition like in the creek. So obviously he died near the creek and it fell into the water. But Beardsley, either it jammed or it was just he ran out of ammo because there was a fight earlier that morning and they just didn't think to reload because they were on the middle of pushing. Whatever happened.
Another major factor is getting dirt or debris in the magazine because it had the half moon windows. And that could just cause it to not function, and then when you're in a firefight, you don't have time to correct that. So
right, but there's a multitude of reasons
but like,
what could have
that's
happened.
Probably
but something happened.
Something happened. Yep.
And his gun jammed, but it doesn't change the fact that there was an automatic rifle in this fight.
Yeah,
this isn't just York.
For sure.
There's an automatic rifle in the middle of it.
Not surprisingly, there's not a show to be seen in the movie. So
yeah, of course not. No,
they probably didn't even know what that was back then.
Oh, they did. It was just a French gun, just like the Model 1917 was a British gun. That's why they didn't want to. It's all about America, and it's like, well,
that's true.
Sorry, Nate.
Just to chime in here though, real quick. I mean, just to go back to the show. I mean, Brian, when was the K98 first dated?
Which one?
The one you think it is.
Doing this again?
Go back to when it shakes the barley. But yeah, I mean the other thing too is like Mike.
It reminded me so much of that.
Mike, you brought up a good point. Because the ammunition and stuff. The 8mm Lebel is such a fucked up round because it was rushed into development that it doesn't do well with debris and violent extraction. So it could have just been like a ruptured.
Well, it's anything like. Here's the thing: is the CSRG-15 had problems. It did. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the best automatic rifle ever invented. However, it was an automatic rifle, and it was a fucking beast when it worked.
It worked. Yeah.
It's like, bam, you've got a lot of firepower with one team of guys. And
they're pretty simple, too.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing is, like, they're simple, but they're also simple to fuck up. And
wasn't it the ammo change that really
they tried to chamber to 30-06, but that was the 1918.
The myth comes from they made a version in 30-06 that wasn't blueprints weren't translated correctly. And this actually happened later in the 50s with another story with they call it the Enfield inch, where they misconverted the FNFALs from Belgian like metric standards to imperial English standards, and that it fucked it all up. Same thing happened with the 1918 versions and 30-6 shows. Basically, they didn't finish machining the end of the chamber, and it was rough. It was like fucking sandpaper, so rounds would get ripped apart and everything. And it was also bad reputation.
They never actually adapted the bolt to take rimmed or rimless ammunition, and so it really the extractor fucking malfunctioned constantly because it couldn't pick up the next round, or like not pick up, but like extract the next round, and that was very, very rushed, and it was not a good design.
And that whole like that I would say mythology that it's a terrible rifle to begin with stems from a lot of that.
Yes.
From the layered development one, because for me, I'm guilty of that too until we really started kind of diving into World War I at the start of this, and I would say maybe like 2 or 3 years ago at this point. I started to realize that the Shusha was not a terrible.
No.
It's a good gun if you use it right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and maintain it.
It's just I mean like anything. I mean the BAR can be a terrible weapon if it's not maintained
other thing-
and done correctly. You know?
The other thing too is that so they gave most of the 30-06 ones, I think, to the Marines.
Yes.
And the Marines showed up and they had Lewis guns, and they took all the Lewis guns away from the Marines and gave it to the Air Corps. So they were fucking pissed. And then they get this horrible piece of shit gun that was rush production and doesn't work. So what do you think the Marines are going to say about this gun that they didn't want in the first place that doesn't
French
work?
piece of shit.
You know, fucking French.
That's the
has
best.
the
That's the
same
best
name.
piece of Marine Corps history at the Battle of Blancmont. Was once the 36th Division showed up to relieve them, the Marines stole all their BARs and gave them their shows. And on the way out, the officers were told every single BAR better be returned, and they had to go back through to every single foxhole and make the Marines give back the BARs to the 36th Division.
It's like a Guadalcanal.
And my favorite's
with the
like
Americall.
Captain James Sellers in his memoir. He wrote that he had to go through and take their BARs, and he's like, "Oh, you guys, this is bad. Don't do that." And then he went back to his foxhole and pulled out the BAR he had taken and had to return it too. So, you know,
Well, that's the thing too. Is like also they were so like, you know, I obviously have an affinity for the 32nd Division. They were issued shows, right? And the French told them how to maintain them, how to fire them. A lot of the Americans, when they got into firefights, especially very early on, would just go cyclic on them. They would just go, and then you get that reciprocating barrel issue. The barrel's not going to reciprocate. The action's not going to work, blah, blah, blah. They have to hit them against trees to try and do that. And when they used them, how the French told them to in bursts and stuff and like walking fire and whatnot, they worked very effectively. And so that's another misnomer about that. But like, yeah.
Well, either way, there was a show in that ravine.
Cool.
With Alvin York.
Yes, there was.
And, you know, the evidence shows that it was all there. Also, just a weird side fact, they also found the tank rifle ammunition in the ravine.
yeah.
Yeah, they did
yeah.
find ammunition for it. So there was one of those in that ravine, too, with the
That
Germans.
makes sense for that was the German sniper, right? From like Battlefield 1. No.
Shooting
No,
at
that was
planes.
actually one of the
that would make sense for a sapper unit, though, to be honest.
kits.
Yeah.
You know, they
Yeah.
should
Yeah,
have
well,
some
and
AT.
they've got it. So there was a lot going on, but if we look at that and the reality of what they found and how the archaeology matches with the research, and now look at that movie of where when that battle hits, even early in the movie, he says, "York, you're the only non-commissioned officer left. Take over." And then York like runs off and goes turkey hunting in the woods. You know,
As any good
it's
PFC
just-
should.
Yeah, and everyone else is just cowering and pissing their pants in the bushes. And York himself is he runs up that slope. That soil and that ravine is so loose. There is no chance in hell he ran up that slope. Right. He did not charge up that slope at all. And in the movie, he's running, he's diving, and he's just taking them out one by one.
Yeah, James, it's the hills of Southern California. They're, you know,
Yeah, of course. Oh, you know, gobble, 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 and he shoots him in the head.
And nothing's greater rounds per minute than your own bolt action than sitting next to a fully loaded Maxim pointed down.
Yeah, of course. Right. You know, screw that.
Germans,
He's a marksman with it, and of course, you know, making sure you're licking your sight.
That is the
after
dumbest
every
shit.
shot.
It's hard to lick the side of an MG08, Nate. That's why.
Yeah. You know, you gotta
Right,
lick
yeah.
that a lot. So.
Yeah.
Well, and the worst, I think the absolute worst, because this is a myth that is just so common, is his turkey shoot. Because that whole scene in the training sets up the scene in the movie where he runs out of ammo, and all of a sudden these Germans put their bayonets and they charge his ass. And he goes, "I got this," pulls his pistol out and shoots them one at a time, back to front, and then shoots the officer in front.
with a Luger.
Yeah, a
wasn't it?
Luger, yeah. And that's
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
Because we didn't have blank
for 45s, yeah.
Yeah.
Right, so he shoots them all in that order, and even that like back to front myth, that was made up in 1922 by Samuel Cohen, the author who wrote the first book about Alvin York. He made it up because the original sources, Petullo and Buxton's 82nd Division history, say that some Germans, they were basically running to the sound of the battle and just ran into York because he was closest, and he shot the officer first and then popped shots off at the others, and they scattered into the woods.
Oh, weird.
Right? That front. So basically, you know, in the ravine, they're coming up this way, and it's wooded, it's thick, it's underbrush. They run into York, pop, 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 pop. He shoots a few of them, and they scatter. And then somehow Samuel Cohen, well, actually, I can explain this part of the myth. When he asked, about it, the way George Petullo wrote the article, in his article, he says that York's skill in shooting came from his turkey hunts back home. That's all he says, is that York was an avid hunter and he used to do a lot of turkey shoots, and that's why York is a good shot. Fast forward to Samuel Cohen, he says, well, turkey shoots, they say they shoot back to front, so that must mean that Alvin York shot them like turkeys and shot them back to front. So he creates that myth of this turkey shoot, and then it gets added into the 1928 book, and then it gets added into the movie. But there's an article after the movie comes out where they're interviewing York, and he says the turkey shoot did not apply to that engagement. Weird. And there's even a weird article where they changed it to squirrels. Like, that's how he shoots squirrels back home.
I didn't know that.
And
Jesus.
Yeah, it's a weird discussion.
With my flintlock.
That myth, yeah, that whole thing, the turkey shoot is a myth that just continues. It just stays. It continues.
It's interesting though, because didn't we do a film recently where they did the turkey gobble?
Yeah. Guadalcanal Diary. They said this is just like Alvin York. Gobble, gobble, gobble. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Was it that? Okay,
yeah.
I couldn't remember what film it was recently, but the guy even went.
He did. He did as a reference because he said that he said, "I'm just like Alvin York." Like,
and they did that in World War II. You can find news articles of them like this soldier in the Pacific is the modern day Alvin York, and they'll use York as a comparison throughout the war. Right. So that makes sense for the movie. But even just, that, I mean, that's just pure myth. That turkey shoot never happened.
It's just so funny just how something just gets latched on and then it gets perpetuated into pop culture and the culture of a country or.
Well, it always happens. It's a bad game of telephone. It's like And hell, as an undergrad, I was a graduate student finishing my master's, and I wrote an article about dragons and elephants in medieval bestiaries. Right, that was my topic for the paper. And what I discovered was it was through translation. So if you look at like 14th century discussions on elephants, it says elephants have no kneecaps, and so they sleep leaning against trees. So the hunters will come out and cut the tree, and the elephant will try to sleep and fall over, and that's how they kill an elephant. And if you back it up, I was like, where did they get this information? So I started looking at older and older and older sources, and if you back it up all the way to Julius Caesar's Gallic Wars, in his discussion of the animals of Gaul, he says that there are elk who don't have knees and they lean on trees, and so the hunters come out and they cut the wood and the elk falls over and they kill it. The next sentence says there are bulls as big as elephants. And so somewhere in that 500 years, someone mistranslated and equated the description of the elk to that reference to an elephant, and then you end up with this weird discussion in the 1400s of elephants with no knees. And so it's a bad game of telephone. One person screws up, and it creates a cascade of bad information, and that's what happened with the myth.
You could write a whole book about that phenomenon. Call it like elephants with no knees or something.
And it's amazing to think. And the turkey shoot is a perfect example. Even that's only 20 years, and in 20 years you create a myth that extends even to Mastriano and Nelson's York Patrol. That stupid ass turkey shoot is in those books. Right, that book came out in 2021, and yet it's there.
99 years after the myth. Sorry.
Yeah.
Didn't Mastriano? He used a photo, and it's like the cover of his book, and he says like that. Yeah, that's York.
What I will say is Mastriano.
That's the best answer. Oh, Jesus Christ.
Mastriano should never, ever, ever be used as a source for any information.
Well, I guess I have to relearn everything then.
That book is absolute garbage. It is full of lies and academic misconduct. Go read the news. He's all in the news right now because his PhD is being investigated for academic fraud.
Whoops.
His book's been pulled for academic fraud. all thanks to me.
Well, he's a politician, right? So I know that they use a
he's
lot
running
of
for governor of Pennsylvania. And I reported him before that. Everyone keeps trying to claim, oh, you're just doing this because of politics. I don't give a shit what he does in Pennsylvania.
Dude, before he was running,
live there.
You told me about that shit. You were posting about that shit. So yeah, I as a witness, no, it's not because of the political shit.
Yeah, no, I did this long before
he
did it.
PhD. This has nothing to do with politics.
Yeah, this is academic work, right? But it's that exact same thing, is that he continues the myth. And he uses a photo on the front cover, which he says, this is confirmed to be. And there's no evidence. He cites himself. So if you go read that article, he says, it appears to be Alvin York. And then he cites himself again. So if you go back another one, he says, this guy has a mustache and kind of looks like Alvin York. Therefore, this must be Alvin York.
Oh, and nobody had a mustache.
As stated
in the
by
American
myself.
Expeditionary Forces.
Yeah, stated by me. Yeah. And he quotes a German document. And so I even tracked down this German document and had it translated. It's just his fucking article in German that was published in something like some stupid gun magazine. Like, it's him. It's just him. So yeah, he's a big issue with perpetuating the myth, and even like I said, James Carl Nelson's book's the same. Perpetuates the myth.
There's a hilarious story of fraud going on in there that could be
all of it,
great and biopic or something. Yeah,
perpetuation of myth throughout the
Polka King.
These authors, what it falls to is that no one bothers to check the history. They don't want to do their own research. They just want to go with. Actually, the number one source for all of these books that come out about him
what
is the 1928 Tom Scahill book about Alvin York. Same thing the movie's based off of.
Nice.
So they all base themselves off this one book that Tom Scahill, the author, is a known scam artist. And the biography, there's a biography about him, and it talks about the fact that he was well known for scams. Even like Anzio, he was at Anzio because he was Australian, and then he faked blindness, and then he becomes the blind poet. Like, he goes blinded at Anzio. And then he comes to America after the war and is miraculously healed at a doctor. Yeah, well, he loses his eyesight at Gallipoli. And then he's in a hospital in Egypt, becomes famous poet. And then after and he's always wearing these sunglasses. And then after the war, when he's in America, he miraculously regains his eyesight. And now he's good again. And now he just goes on tour and he's like, hey, Alvin York, I see a good money-making opportunity. Let me write a book about you. And then he just makes shit up throughout the whole thing or excludes bits and pieces. And he calls it The Diary of Alvin York, like Alvin York wrote it. So, and it's all in the first person in that stupid mountain dialect that never existed.
Mountain talk.
So, yeah. I touched him off. That's the one word he likes. I touched him off.
Put that potatoes in a poke.
Yeah, it's... All of it is just made up, but it's all using that one bad source. And it's ridiculous when we think about it now. It's like there were 17 men, 6 were killed. So there are 11 men who survived that battle, and all of these authors only cared about one person's perspective, and they ignored the 10 others.
I think we went over this the first time, but did any of those guys get any type of I don't want to say accommodation. Is that the right word, accommodation?
Technically, yes. Okay. The investigation was a sham to get him the Medal of Honor. Everyone uses that like that's the go-to. Well, they did an investigation. Yeah, it was bullshit. It was a scam. They had the paperwork filled out before they even went and did the investigation. So that proves it. But technically, when they did it, they said none of the other men deserve awards. And it went up the chain, and they changed it to none of the other men deserve the Distinguished Service Cross. And then it goes up the board again to the final commanding officer, Lindsay, and he says no one deserves any special recommendations. But then Lindsay does cite 5 of the guys in general orders, which later qualifies them for a Silver Star. So 5 of the men were later cited, but that was it. And then Bernard Early is cited for a DSC recommendation in the 20s, and the War Department buries it because it would undermine York, and York wouldn't agree to sign it. So they buried it, and then in 1929, they got embarrassed when it came to light that they had buried it before. And so they gave Early a Distinguished Service Cross in 1929. And then fast forward to 1965, with the intervention of President Lyndon B. Johnson, Otis Merrithew, a.k.a. Cutting in the movie, is awarded a Silver Star.
So how does this pretty obscure action in a ravine in France in the Meuse Argonne, end up turning into this huge Medal of Honor, winning event. I got a free house from Tennessee now.
Yeah. It's a press agent. I mean, that's it. I mean, Alvin York is not remarkable. He's not remarkable at all. In fact, I'll just pull Oklahoma. The same day, October 8th, Sam Sampler charges a machine gun nest, actually single-handedly, and kills and captures the Germans, and then gets the Medal of Honor. We never talk about him. So why did Alvin York become this creature, this big one?
This creature.
This creature. This creation.
Because
Creation
of
is
God.
what I was going for. And basically what I found was he originally got the DSC. Right, fine, whatever. He got the DSC. But Duncan, his commanding officer, George Duncan, who led the 82nd Division, Duncan's reputation was shit. His commanding officer, Hunter Liggett, hated the man. If you read the diary of Hunter Liggett's aide, he would record the general's thoughts on people. And on October 8th, on the battle for Hill 223, or whatever the hill was, 123, I can't think of the number, he writes in his diary that Duncan's an idiot and thinks he should be given a DSC for doing nothing but holding his dick and playing around all day. And
this is in the times, this is the teens when people spoke properly.
Yeah. Well, and his thought was that his biggest failure was Hill 223. Well, the officers, they knew they'd lose their rank after the war because their ranks are only wartime. And so they were all clamoring to find something to hold their rank. And Duncan hears this story about this country bumpkin conscientious objector in his unit who got the DSC, and he starts telling everyone about it and basically attaches himself to York and becomes York's press agent. He tells the reporters, he pulls in George Petullo, and then he recommends York for the Medal of Honor based purely on York's story of what happened, right? And a Medal of Honor investigation, you should think would take a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks to actually be good. York's Medal of Honor investigation is a total of 3 days. It was recommended the Medal of Honor on February 5th, and it was after our investigation, we want him to be given the Medal of Honor on February 7th. 5, 6, 7, 3 days, right? And so after that, Duncan puts him in the press. George Petullo, writing for the Saturday Evening Post, the largest magazine in the country, writes, "The second elder gives battle." And all of a sudden, York is thrown into the limelight. Now, there are some historians that have argued about this. How do you create these heroes? And basically, the idea is York is a draftee. He's a salt of the earth kind of guy, and he beat the army at its own game. And that makes a folk hero. And that's what really pushes him. Most people also quote Pershing when Pershing says that Alvin York was the greatest soldier of World War I. That's not true. The actual quote says that many soldiers exemplify the standards of the U.S. Army. That includes Charles Whittlesey, Alvin York, and Samuel Woodfill.
James Whittlesey.
And Samuel Woodfill. And in Pershing's perspective, Samuel Woodfill was the greatest soldier of World War I. But Samuel Woodfill is a career military guy, and Alvin York beat the army, so Alvin York becomes the folk hero. And becoming that folk hero creates the legend, which then just spirals out of control.
And then to kind of go off what you said about how that officer then is his press agent per se. What other in your research have you been able to find out who really profitized from
Duncan,
Sgt.York?
Duncan.
Just Duncan by himself.
So Duncan and Lindsay saved their reputations, and then after the war, when he comes home. And he goes to all these press dockets. Sitting next to him on the stage is General George Duncan. He follows York around. Duncan saves his reputation, and pulls in the accolades as being Alvin York's commanding officer. And so, that could have been the end of it. But in the 1920s, when the other men start speaking out and want to be recommended, guess who's the officer at the War Department that receives the recommendations for the other men? George Duncan. And George Duncan buries it. So he saved his reputation, he kept his rank, and he went into the War Department and then was in a position to bury the other men in their recommendations.
And because and you had stated before, like, worried about losing their own rank.
Mhm.
What rank was he before all that?
Well, he was a general. So
Okay.
and
So
I
why
don't wanna be wrong.
why would he lose his rank?
So most of the
coming out?
army,
That's what I'm
especially the
confused about.
National Army guys, the draftees,
Mhm.
their ranks are just for the duration of the war. The
Right.
army didn't have, all these generals, right? So these men
Right.
are being promoted in wartime, but they all knew that when the war was over, the army was going to downsize and send everybody home. And with that downsizing, you don't need 200 generals anymore.
Right.
And so the ranks would be, would drop back to the pre-war ranks.
So what would keep him from keeping? What would allow him to keep his rank, or was this before
Reputation.
the war was even done? Reputation. Okay.
Reputation purely. I mean, he attaches himself, plus the fact that Liggett was pissed at him. I mean, I'm not joking. There's like 4 times he's like, Duncan's a moron and we should replace him, right? So he obviously wasn't in good standing, but
Right.
his reputation attached himself to York, and with that, he was able to bounce it and move forward. So that's purely why it was created. It was not for war bonds. It was not for anything. It was purely by the army officers to save their reputation.
He's a fucking grifter.
And keep their position.
Fucking grifter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what happened. And then Alvin York goes home and gets a free farm and lives in Tennessee making a Bible school, which what idiot decided it was a good idea for an uneducated guy who never made it past the 8th grade to run a school? That's just the stupidest thing.
How did it go?
It failed. They kicked him out. The board kicked him off kicked him out of the director position. So he got kicked out because he's.
It sounds like he wasn't a very likable person.
No, and then hell, he died. He had a bunch of tax fraud, because he never paid his taxes, and the government bailed him out because they were like, "This looks bad if our greatest hero is a criminal of tax fraud," and so they bailed him out before his death. But
Oh my God.
it's like York is just a country bumpkin. I mean, and to be fair to him, just to prove I'm not York bashing, I mean, he is the start of it. He is the cause of it. It's his story, and he got the reputation. And even before the war ended, he was taken on a press tour throughout France to speak to all these other troops about his story before the Medal of Honor stuff. And so York was already parading around telling everyone his version of events. But York found himself in a position with his officers taking control of it that he can't get out of now. He's got to go with it.
Yeah.
And so it's George Petullo changing the story. It's the army officers attaching them to his story. And then it's the authors in the 20s attaching themselves and changing things. And then it's Warner Brothers attaching themselves and changing things. So York becomes a victim of all these other groups manipulating his story for their own benefit.
And then this film is 20 years after the fact with all of that bullshit going on in the interwar years. And this is the result you get.
This is the result. And he, made a lot of money off of it.
Yeah.
And it went to his Bible school, but even that, he didn't pay his taxes on it, which is the issue. So, but I mean,
That's
like
hysterical.
I said, I am sure Alvin York, besides this point in his life, is a good guy. I mean, he had good intentions. He wanted to bring education to the people of where he's from. All right, good intentions. I'm all for
Just
that.
not
the
good
issue
enough.
was,
Yeah.
no, the issue was that he left out all these other men multiple times when he had the opportunity.
Yeah.
And these other men suffered because of it.
Do you think that's because he
By
was?
the time the movie comes out, they're screwed.
Do you think that's because he was told to do that, or do you just think he did that?
I think it's both.
Okay.
I think it's like I said, he's in a position where he can't get out of it.
Yeah.
They even Otis Merrithew cutting, he wrote a letter to Warner Brothers saying like there were 16 others.
Yeah.
We want our say in what happens with this movie. And they toyed around with the idea of bringing Merrithew out to be the consultant for the battle scenes. And I've got it's in the book, but it's a letter from one of the screenwriters, and he basically says, "Are you idiots? You know damn well bringing him on set would piss off York, and York has total control of this movie. So they don't allow the other men any say in the movie.
Yeah.
They just exploit them and use exploitative tactics.
That's why it turned out
and
like
pay 'em
shit.
off.
In hindsight,
And the men were pissed, and they get left out of the story. And, these men, you get like Patrick Donahue was suffering from severe PTSD when they found him. Thomas Johnson was in Texas suffering from extreme case of PTSD. And they just basically lied and paid him penance and got them to sign a document, and then made the movie they wanted it, and kicked out the other men from their own story.
Yep.
Now, just a quick question. Now, a lot has been said about PTSD, shell shock, whatever you want to call it, battle fatigue. But like, were they just alcoholics or?
So Patrick Donahue was an alcoholic, and he was wounded. He got the Purple Heart and the Silver Star for actions on that day in the battle. He was an alcoholic in the 20s or in the 30s when they found him. He did get himself together and help move forward. But Thomas Johnson, I mean, he was the one I could find the least amount of information on. But the stories of when they found him and for the movie, he was living broke and poor, sheltered away in Denison, Texas, and never wanting to really see the light of day. He never talked about it, and was obviously suffering from the side effects. And I mean, all the others were too. I mean, Marathew, he was dealing with it. Early was shot 3 times. I mean, he dealt with a lot of repercussions of the war afterwards. But and the thing is, people argue once this movie came out that the other men are just jealous. They want the money and the fame. But that original letter mentioned nothing of money. It simply wanted the battle to be right. And of course they're pissed off. How would you feel if, the 5 of us all did something and we were all integral into it, and then after the battle, everyone's talking about me and how great I was, and the rest of you were just pissing yourselves in the corner.
James wrote this book. What a fucking asshole.
Exactly. And then, then we make a movie about me and how great I am, and I don't include any of you in that discussion or the movie.
Now, you should edit this dialogue so it sounds like he's just saying that sincerely. So we're going to make a movie about me and how great I am.
How great I am, and none of you are ever going to get your mention. Right? And so, of course, they're pissed off. I would be pissed off that this story is national news, and it's been completely York single-handed when there were 16 other men in that ravine with him. 6 who were killed, and you basically just wipe away their entire existence. And the movie does that spectacularly, or it just erases the other men.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's only Mr. Lick-Sights.
Yeah, and it's like, so...
It took me a full second to realize you weren't saying a real last name.
Yeah.
It took me a whole second to realize you weren't saying a real last name.
Yeah, fucking get it together, Nathan.
Polish? Is he Polish or is he Italian? Lick-Sights.
Lick-Sights.
Polish.
Private Lick-Sights.
Lick-Sights. Not Native American.
What the fuck?
Oh, that's right. Yeah, he's from the Hopi Nation, right?
Yeah, of course.
The fuck was I just
hills
gonna
of
ask?
Tennessee.
Thank you, clowns.
Yeah, right.
But oh, what the fuck was I gonna say? Oh yeah, so that's why I asked you earlier, James. I was like, if it was made today, like it could probably be made like better, because now we have the information from somebody who has actually done legitimate research and not just less than the bare minimum. And like you got the story as correct as we can know it. That's the thing is
the way I want to say it is, right now we have the story of one man getting the Medal of Honor, and single-handedly. But what's the better? And Lindsay did later try to like make amends for it, and he wrote a letter to Duncan saying, "I should have recommended all of the other men for Silver Stars." So what's a better story? One man coming out of this ravine with all the glory, or a story of a 17-man patrol sent on a suicide mission, and these 17 men, 6 are killed, so these 11 men capture 132 Germans, and at the end of the day, you have a Medal of Honor, 2 Distinguished Service Crosses, and 14 Silver Stars. That's unheard of for a unit, yet that is what happened here, and I think that is a much better story than this epic myth that has become Alvin York.
Right, and also I do want to point this out. It's going to be very controversial to a lot of the listeners. Those guys doing that thing on that patrol, okay? While extraordinary and fucking insane, that many awards for that patrol, also insane.
Mm-hmm.
And so
it's a suicide mission.
But here's the thing: is like but like I'm coming at the perspective of like the AEF was very hell bent on capitalizing on stories like this, as we have seen and the right people get contacted. And because here's the thing, James, is like there were other patrols that did similar shit, like you were just saying, on the same day and everything. They probably didn't even get bronze stars. They were just like, "Hey, good job. Hey, fucking A."
All comes down to a press agent.
Exactly. And so that's another story to tell is, so why did this patrol in this particular unit at this time on this day, when there was a shitload of people fighting the same battles in this front, in this offensive, why these guys? Was it because of the trickle down from like York? Oh, you get the Medal of Honor, Distinguished Service Crosses. Okay, well, we have to give them something or it's going to look like shit, or, that's the kind of thing is like the AEF was very award happy because they were like, whoa, this is the first time we've been mobilized on this scale in a long time. Let's just fucking shell out awards. Morale. Then we can get these guys, the DSCs and all this shit, the Silver Stars, to go around and talk, and then we can send the guy with the Medal of Honor home, and which didn't happen, I know, but like, they were thinking there was gonna be a 1919 offensive. Okay, we can send him home and like drive war bonds and like blah blah blah. So that's also the perspective that people need to think about in the First World War, especially with the American Expeditionary Force. When I say AEF,
well, you do need to take into account that just before the war, the Army completely revamped their requirements for the Medal of Honor. Because they've given so many out.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
1917, they were like, we need to increase the standard to make the Medal of Honor actually mean something. So to give it to York and create this story, I know that, it's an understanding that like to get a medal, you really have to kind of exaggerate a bit on the recommendation to get people that deserve medals. But in this case, to erase an entire unit to give one man the source, which also, by the way, I am able to prove that some of the recommendations were forged. So
talk about that quick.
That's also, so like the recommendation is, people always claim that, well, they did in affidavits. They're not affidavits. There's 5, and they're all Alvin York's sworn statement. So it's Alvin York's. There are no affidavits.
Well, no. Hold on for a second. There were no sworn statements from any other person that participated in any.
No, that's the beauty of this. Everyone has given me shit for it. I went and tracked down Alvin York's service file. It survived the fire. I have it, and I can prove to you that the 5 affidavits that gave him the Medal of Honor are his, Alvin York's, statement to which the other men signed. And I quote unquote that because Fyodor Sok and Joseph Kornacki are signed with an X, and then it says his mark. Fyodor Sok signed his own draft registration card. He can sign his own damn name. And Joseph Kornacki, while he did have to sign his draft registration with an X, remember, I told you, Camp Gordon had an entire school to teach these guys how to sign their names and understand English. They could all sign their names. So if you look at it in the grand scheme of things, I want you to think about this. February 5th is the day that he wrote, I'd recommend Alvin York for the Medal of Honor. Pershing says, okay, do an investigation. February 7th is the day they go out to the site, only taking York, by the way. They go out to the site, take York, say, York, what happened here? And York tells them what happened, and they're like, all right, cool, we agree, and we go home and we recommend him. Here's the beauty of it. When would you think the affidavits were signed? If on February 7th is the day they went out there?
Before that.
No, you the proper way is that you have to first go to the site and get the information to write up a statement, right? Right? You can't write a statement
I know what you're saying.
Unless you've done the investigation.
I thought they would have gotten statements beforehand before even doing the investigation,
they were.
Right?
The statements were signed February 6th, which means they prepared them and then forced the other men to sign them before they even did their investigation. So they had already accepted Alvin York's story and were already determined they were going to give him the Medal of Honor. So the entire investigation is a sham. It was purely for looks. It didn't actually exist.
And if a general is pushing it, that paperwork's going to be pushed.
Exactly. And it was.
At what point did they say, "Hey, you think you can hit that canteen?" Why, yes, I
so
can.
That's the beauty of it. Patullo does say that, like, one of the officers mentioned to York, "Oh, I wonder if I could make that shot," and he kind of alludes to a shooting competition between the two. But then in the archaeology, when they found all of these shell casing or casings in the area, and then artifacts with like different size bullet holes, it's very obvious that they had set these items up for target practice while they were doing the investigation.
It just sounds like a field trip. Like, we got everything done,
and that's what it was. It was some
hey, we're on the battlefield. You did that.
Listening to York, never taking anyone else. Also, I should say this for you, Mike. They never asked Bernie Early, Otis Merrithew, or Thomas Johnson for their statements on what happened.
And that's a complete crock of shit.
The officers in charge were never asked.
That's a complete crock of shit, because it's like, okay, so if the standards were raised in 1917 for the Medal of Honor, right? The way I've heard it go on for the most part since then is you need a shitload of sworn statements, testimony, other people that were there with you have to recommend to your chain of command directly that, yeah, it's the Medal of Honor and blah, blah, blah. And then they have to fill out sworn statements individually, sign them with witnesses, right? And then it goes up, and then there's an investigation, and it's not usually just a couple weeks. It's usually, well, during wartime, okay, I'll give you a couple weeks. But like,
yeah, but this is after the war.
I know, but I'm saying during wartime, sure, a few weeks going out there.
Oh yeah.
But you need a shitload of sworn statements.
Well,
it's
goes
with
back
the fucking
to the
Silver
movie.
Star, dude. Like it's in the Bronze Star.
Well, the movie shows this, right?
Yeah.
There's a whole scene in the movie of them doing this investigation and taking these officers with York and being like, "Oh yeah, York, you definitely did all this." You know?
Yeah.
And also they drove up there. If you notice in the movie, they drove into the ravine.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's in the movie. This whole investigation's in the movie. And it's obvious that they felt like people realize these affidavits aren't really correct. So 2 weeks after they've done their full investigation, there's another affidavit signed that's more personable, that kind of gives it more like, oh, we didn't make this up. And it's signed by two men, Percy Beardsley and George Wills, which Percy Beardsley ends up having like 4 different sworn statements for this entire thing. But the beauty of it is that these two men swore, quote unquote, to a document that they saw these things that Alvin York did. These two men were the exact opposite sides of that ravine during the engagement. They could not have seen what Alvin York did. Even Alvin York admits that he couldn't see anyone else but the Germans during the battle because they're in thick underbrush.
Right.
They're in the woods. And so the fact that these men are all swearing to what York did, none of them saw anything any other person was doing. So there's no way they could swear to what happened. But they are told to sign these documents, and they do.
It's mafioso style.
But James, didn't you just watch the movie? I mean, the movie, they show a different way than what you're saying, and the movie got it right. So I don't know why you.
Yeah, well, the movie's got everything. Alvin York swore to it, and of course, that Medal of Honor investigation, that can't be wrong. There are people that are on Facebook, and I like to stoke the fire every now and then. But there are people that truly believe the Medal of Honor is sacrosanct. Like that, you do not question the Medal of Honor or any investigations to it. I have been in constant argument with these people that are like, no, how dare you question his Medal of Honor? You're now questioning the integrity of York and those Army officers, and they are the utmost, and like somehow none of that should be it. That's the final say. But it's not the truth. And when you actually look into it, it's full of the fact that these are people who are greedy and are self-serving, and they make up these documents. And people really, truly have gotten into, heated arguments with me over the fact that I even thought to question.
Well, that's because I'm just going to say this. I'm just going to say this. They've never been in the military because that shit is still running rampant. And if you knew the amount of bullshit that goes on with people that deserve awards don't get them, and people that don't deserve awards and get them based on who they know, even nowadays, it should surprise me more. But like, I'm sorry, Nate, I'll be done in a second. it should surprise me more, but it really doesn't. And I'm just like, oh, it's been going on for over 100 fucking years. Well, probably longer. But it's like it's not what you did. It's who you know and who sees you, and how they can benefit. I was just gonna say, how they can benefit from what you did, because these fucking officers didn't have the balls to do what York did. They were never in a firefight. They were never in combat. On the front lines. But hey, they're gonna benefit from that shit. Fucking leeches. Fucking miserable sacks of shit. Sorry, Nate.
No, it's fun. Brian has hands up first. So.
Well, just really quickly, it's kind of interesting. So you say this, sacrosanct, Medal of Honor bullshit, whatever. Have you ever heard of Brian Mark Rigg? He's a historian. He's wrote a few books. He came out with one recently called Flamethrower. And he was contracted from Woody Harrison, the last surviving Medal of Honor vet from the Second World War.
Okay.
Who he won his Medal of Honor on Iwo Jima in 1945. And he was like, I want to, tell my story. He did this year. So he was like, I want to tell my story. And this historian was like, fuck yeah, let's do it. He went to Iwo Jima with him. He did all this stuff. And then he started doing research. And he found all these horrible inconsistencies in his Medal of Honor process. So he wrote a 500 fucking page book about it. And Woody Harrelson sued him. Because he was like, no. And all these people that are like, you are a Marine. You can't attack a Marine. What are you saying? And he was like, this is where the facts led me. I was going to write the book, and this is history. I'm a historian.
This is the truth.
And the same thing's happening. They're putting him on a cross and nailing him, and all these like guys in the 80s and 70s, like these older Marines are like, you can't take down a brother. And he's like, it's fucking facts. It is facts. Yeah. And it's just a lot of things that he talks about in his book align directly with what you're saying. And this is 26 years later. It's 1945.
Well, I was just gonna chime off of what Brian said in a way. It's like you also have a thing where we have put these people up on a pedestal. You are using them to drive the war bonds. They are the American hero. They're the folk hero, American hero. They are part of the pop culture and the cultural as an integrity for Americans. I think specifically for World War I, World War II, and specifically people who we've been able to interact while they're still alive. It's hard to obviously, do that with a Civil War veteran for us, obviously. But, World War I, near the early part of our lives, we could still have that ability to interact with them. And now with World War II on its way out, unfortunately, we're hitting that same thing. And I think you have that integrity where, you have, the boomers, the whole generation before us, Gen X or whatever, I can't remember which one it is. But, they all had that time with World War I and World War II vets, specifically with, these are Medal of Honor recipients, or this is the greatest generation. I completely agree with that statement, but at the same time, not everyone is the golden poster boy. There is exactly what we've already said already. There is corruption. There is personal gain. There is manipulation to get an agenda. Whether it's the government, whether it's your own personal beliefs, whatever. There is still all that. So when you start attacking kind of like what we consider to be the pinnacle heroes and the icons of what made that generation or that war or whatever, it's like people they feel personally attacked because we have, as a society, have boosted them so high. Yeah. And it's very interesting what you said, like, trying to take down let me rephrase that, not take down, to counter the legend of Sgt.York with factual evidence to say, hey, this has happened, and people going, no, there's no way. Sgt.York, he was the man.
That all the time.
He taught special children in his Bible school. How dare you?
It's not my fault. And they're always like, how dare you say it? I'm like, it's not me. It's the sources. Like,
he paid all his taxes.
I'm just the mediator.
I'm just presenting you with the facts.
Here's the document.
It's like
I'm not making up dates. Here's the paperwork. This shows it.
If you can give factual evidence, like if you can say here's everything, which you can, I feel like you're totally entitled to take a different take on a legend, whoever it may be. I feel like it's when people go, well, I just don't like him because he's Christian. Like that. Okay, yeah, fuck off.
Mastriano tried to do that. His claim to it, if you read the first of his book, is like anyone that questions York is just a detractor that doesn't believe in God. And basically the way they did it for all these years was like, and I wrote this in my book. Basically, the way these authors have written this over the years is like, God is the reason Alvin York accomplished this. So to question Alvin York is to question God.
Yeah.
And that has been the predominant way.
Is that the preamble of his like Bible school?
That's like zealotry though.
It is.
Yeah.
And
that's
now
different.
Mastriano's the worst about it because I mean he's extremely religious. But even like Petullo's original article was, if you question York, I mean, York says God helped him get through it. And of course, this is a different generation that are more religious, but it's still the fact that was his statement. And so people that truly believe that, more power to them. But the issue is, as a historian trying to be as unbiased as possible, they're like, well, that's not true. I don't care what the other men say. Alvin York had God behind him, and so he's the only source I need. And, if I question Alvin York, then I'm questioning
It's a fallacy. It's a fallacy.
Hell, it is. And it's unfortunate that has been exactly the way it's
if somebody worded. I don't care what fucking subject you're talking about. I don't care what it's about at all. If somebody says, if you don't believe this, you hate grandma, you don't like religion, you hate God, you hate this group of people.
If you hate Sgt.York, you hate America.
Right. Exactly. You hate America. Yeah. You hate whatever country you're in.
He is America.
As soon as somebody opens their quote unquote argument up with that, they lose. They have nothing. Because
but once you get to that point, they won't deal with anyone dealing with a fallacy will never accept the fact that they're dealing with a fallacy.
No, because they've been fooled themselves, and again, like Mark Twain said, it's a lot easier to fool somebody than convince somebody that they've been fooled. And unfortunately, that's the way it is. It's like we've all talked to brainwashed people that just think a certain way. I've been brainwashed. I fucking know how it works. Okay, I bought into a lot of propaganda in my life.
All those cheese curds.
Well, that's not propaganda. We'll talk about that later. But like, no, but like, I've bought into a bunch of shit. That's how I know when I can be on the outside looking in. I'm like, oh, you're brainwashed. And then if your argument starts with that kind of verbiage, it's like, well, then you've been brainwashed completely, and you're not being objective. You're not.
Well, and you also have to realize how deep this is.
Exactly.
The Army is so involved in this now that you've got the Alvin York State Park. You've got these people that have dedicated their lives to Alvin York and his story. And I've even, I've had an argument, it was on Facebook, with Alvin York's grandson. And
I met them.
We argued over this, and I said, here is an interview with your grandfather proving that I am right. And his response was, well, journalists change things. So they didn't matter. It didn't matter. Their interview was with his grandfather.
Dude,
the journalists changed things. And
what
that
color
was
is
the
this
end
guy? You can't convince an idiot.
No, you can't. Well,
and so
it's not an idiot. It's just somebody that's so set in their fucking way. Yeah, it's so ingrained that it's like, yeah, I'm guilty of it. We're all guilty of it at a certain point.
You can't correct stubbornness.
But it's like at a certain point.
You can't fix stupid.
Let's just at least hear what somebody has to say instead of just.
It's like
putting up
they
that
only
fucking
had
wall.
MG42s on Omaha Beach, right, Michael?
Don't start with that, dude.
But didn't you see Saving Private Ryan the movie? I mean, they had MG42s in these big concrete bunkers.
That's not that far fetched, really. I mean, that's a lot of people.
The only thing that I remember, it was Mike's face, and I remember this. It was like the first time we all got together to talk, and it was Mike's face when he was telling me that he thought the story of Alvin York was for war bonds and shit, and I was like, that has nothing to do with it. And it wasn't the fact that Mike just was an idiot; it's because Mike didn't understand the shit that I've figured out. Right? It's actually
but I was also willing to like hear you out. And
and that's the thing. You were just so shocked that what you thought was true is not even the case.
Absolutely. It's like, I thought that was true for many years. And it was like, okay, well, here's the thing. Now that I've heard something else and I trust, or here's the thing, not necessarily even that, I'm just willing to hear somebody out. If what you said sounded like total bullshit and fucking whatever to me, I'd still be like, okay, I respectfully disagree with you. Like, I don't agree with that. But the way I was asking questions, you were able to answer them with actual evidence, physical and, the letters are physical evidence and all that shit. That's physical evidence. So
here's the document.
Right.
Don't argue with me. Argue with the document.
Right. Argue with the document. And it's like, I can't. And that was like, it wasn't like I was fucking pissed off or whatever, or I thought of myself as anything less. It was just like, that's really fucking interesting. Like I hadn't thought about it that way. And so,
and then you went and sat in the shower and cried and ate cheese curds.
In the shower.
Sat in the toilet wrong for 2 months, with the crying little
I
table
warmed them up
line.
before I ate them. Shut the fuck up.
Look, what I've learned now is that, especially with this story, is that people aren't going to take my word for it. It doesn't matter how many degrees I have. It doesn't matter my background with the research. If they are so ingrained, they're never going to listen to me. And so what I plan on doing is, when the book comes out, I'll self-publish a resource book, and I'll just give everyone that wants every document I used, it'll be right there. You can get the book and read every single letter yourself, read every document.
But most people won't
yourself.
do that. Most people won't do that because
no, they won't. They won't go through that
because it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, where's
No, just sit
Mastriano's?
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah,
First
yeah,
one is him in German, then him in
Yeah.
Belgium.
Yeah, they're gonna
French.
sit on Facebook and just tell you you're wrong, and you're gonna be like, "Well, give me."
Well,
tell me
that's
why
the thing
I'm
is
wrong."
like
Well, just
I don't
'cause.
care.
Just
Here's the
You
thing.
hate America,
If,
and you're a
if
communist.
somebody presents somebody with factual evidence, like actual tangible evidence, you can question the evidence, all that shit. That's fine, and you can still not believe it. But don't just turn a fucking blind eye to it. That's so retarded.
Yeah. No, but that's exactly what everyone does. And I
Yeah.
mean, hell, one of my opening lines in the book was, "This book will demolish the myth of Sergeant Alvin York." And people just get mad at the word myth. And this is what it is. It's a myth.
Well,
it's
and
a mythological
it's like we were
story.
saying before. It does not discredit York at all because he was there. He was in combat. He engaged in this particular firefight.
No, it's not true. And the movie,
Right.
the Warner Brothers movie, is the moment where it turned Alvin York from a legend, just a legend, to a myth. And that's the whole point.
Yep. All right.
This is I just connected some dots, and then we'll
great
jump
website.
into. We're going to go to IMFTB, guys, like we always do. But so last week we had on Dave Holland from Walking a Battlefield, or Guadalcanal Walking a Battlefield, and we talked a lot about John Basselon at one point and stuff, and the myths of what happened. And like, if you listen to it or get into it, like he talks about the real battle of with Basselon and stuff, and it's fucking fascinating. Like he never burned his arm. Like, that was bullshit. He didn't burn it in the way that they said he did, and the positions was all different and everything. And it's just, again, like this myth gets perpetuated about somebody due to things. And then to peel the layers back, first you have to fight, culture and everything. And second, you just have to look for the real primary sources.
If you and just to kind of bounce off that, I mean, I guess the version of the John Basselon thing in terms of its own, I don't know the media history of John Basselon in the sense of the Guadalcanal event, but I know something we can always pull from is the Pacific, and the details that they had, the freedom and liberties that they used to either make it more badass or more interesting or whatever. The fact that people then take that as
Gospel.
This is gospel. Spielberg and Tom Hanks touched this. This is everything. You dare not, take it back. But it's like with Dave's research, it's different. And to me, I think it's more digestible and more of an interesting scenario than, hit firing, cradling a water cool, and moving bodies, running out and pushing it out, because you kind of go, okay, well, really, did that happen? Because we study this stuff, and so it was very curious to have that other thing. So again, to that, it's like building up this nomenclature, and then when people take for gospel, then they will not bend or break to what they've seen or what they want to believe.
Dude, yeah, I mean, like, and someone who's done my stuff with Omaha Beach, and people, if I say, oh, the bunkers, whatever, the defenses, all that shit was nothing like how it was in Saving Private Ryan. They say the same thing. Oh, how dare you question that movie? Spielberg and Tom Hanks are lords to us, basically.
They've got some of the obstacles backwards.
Yeah, that's the least of their problems, James.
I mean, don't get me. I mean, I will say this. It's like, in terms of Spielberg and Tom Hanks, it's like, in terms of, if we say like anything they touch, like the team that they surround themselves in to do these productions and these huge movies, they do go beyond the research and everything, from the most part, from what we had before, because we never had that much research and dedication and that detail to that. Mm-hmm. And like, I will say that they brought in a new era of filmmaking within that war and that time period.
Yeah.
However, they do take some liberties of doing the Hollywoodisms that we all hate, or we all don't like. So,
what I was going to say is, it's interesting because, like, what we're talking about, how people will say, like, how dare you, this sort of thing, and then sometimes, and I've had this happen where, like, you present them the facts, like kind of what James is talking about, and they say, well, it probably seemed that way to those guys, or something like that. It's like they try to go to bargaining or something like that, and it's like, you just shut up and take the L, you motherfucker. Jesus Christ. So I get it. I totally get it.
It's a hell of a battle, but I mean, I'm excited. I'm excited for the book to come out purely to fight with people.
I like that. Yeah,
it'll be fun. IMFDB, the Colt Single Action Army, 7.5 inch.
He shoots his initials into a tree.
So just to paint a picture real quick, it's like anyone who hasn't seen this movie is going to see it afterwards. Take it with a grain of salt. It's Hollywood, but this is the days before the war, and they're in the middle.
Well, before the U.S. got involved in the war, just want to be very specific.
Right. Sorry. Yeah. Thank you. And just in the middle of Appalachia and just doing shit, and so it's just fucking Western guns out the ass and old technology stuff, because you'll look at it and go, why are you guys talking about percussion cap rifles if we're talking about fucking World War One? So that's why. So when you hear that we start talking about Kentucky flintlocks and all that kind of stuff, that's the reason. There's this whole beforehand of that. So suggest you go see the movie, but take it with a grain of salt. I always fall asleep until about 3/4 of the way in, and then I wake up, and then it's always on.
Watch the movie and then go buy my book.
Yeah.
Go to
So
shameless
revolvers, plug. 1911s. They did have one, but I don't think he ever fired it for obvious reasons.
They're the straight 11s too, not the A1s.
Yeah, straight 11s.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Which those are like what?
Oh, hang on, go back up.
Now.
So this is one of the scenes, right? No, I mean the actual. So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So you see there, it's got early, but then it has Harry Parsons. So in the movie, they have Harry Parsons like going with the patrol, but Harry Parsons was the commanding officer of the whole regiment after Kirby Stewart was killed. He did not go after York he didn't just like abandon the entire rest of the.
You guys do
men.
You. Yeah. I'll
good
back.
luck. No, so that's
I'm going on the
part
suicide
of the movie
mission.
They've got Parsons like following York and being a part of everything. He's not in there at all. But that comes from Harry Parsons trying to like get a piece of the action when the movie was made.
Of course.
Just a fun side note.
Yeah, the PO8. Yep, Luger.
Yeah,
of course,
Luger's everywhere firing because they blanked them up. Yeah.
All the German officers in the movie wear their peaked caps, not their helmets.
That's supposed to be Paul Vollmer.
Yeah.
As the officer.
Or as the guy who goes, tell him it's useless. Is that supposed to be Vollmer?
No, it's supposed to be Vollmer, the one they captured. They keep calling him a German lieutenant, but they didn't know.
Okay.
But yeah, with his stupid ass peaked hat and Pusher's dumb face.
Pusher! I'm from the Bronx.
You talk better English than I do.
Yeah. I didn't go to that English school because I'm a retard.
Jesus,
Probably
coming
right
in hot with
the
roast there, Brian.
I'm from the tri-state area. I live an hour away from New York City, so I can make fun of it.
There's the Luger, yeah.
Yeah, it gets a lot of screen time.
Hold on, Brian. I don't understand your accent. You need to talk like this.
The beautiful
for me
part is
go fuck yourself.
Otis Merrithew is actually the one that claims he took the Luger off of Vollmer, not York.
Oh, interesting. Huh.
So that whole story, he might have taken one for sure, but there is no written account of him like taking the German. In fact, I have recorded evidence from not only Merrithew but the officer Harry Parsons that proves Merrithew's the one that had the Luger.
So you said that there was like 9mm casings also found, and you don't know if that is from the shooting competition in the fucking field trip, or if that's from like the actual action. So is there a possibility that could have been the Luger that was picked up? I mean, you never know, but
the argument there's only York. So a lot of the stuff with the story is it only comes from York. No one else mentions it. Like the German throwing a grenade. Only York ever even like brought that into the discussion. But there's also this argument that Vollmer still had his pistol and was trying to shoot York the whole time, and he missed every shot. The issue with that,
he's not from Tennessee for sure. Then
right. Well, and the issue with that is that Michael
Cecina,
his when they interviewed him, he said that he kept his gun trained on the German officer the whole time because they knew how outnumbered they were, and if the Germans figured that out, they'd all be screwed. So I don't see this idea of the German, standing up in the middle of this firefight trying to shoot York and no one shooting him. But they found some 9mm casings on the ground. Someone could have fired, but no, I don't think it's likely because they surrounded them so quickly and took their guns off of them that they took the Luger beforehand. There's
it's actually a trapdoor.
The trapdoor that's mocked up to look like a flintlock.
Mocked up.
Yeah.
Yeah, supposed to look like a Kentucky
Shooting
rifle.
the V's.
You can scroll down, Nate.
Sorry.
We speak mountain talk, but we have micrometers, where we can measure the differences of bullets.
Yeah, the 1903.
Oh, and this is always the big one. Of course, we talked about this last time. Did York have a Springfield or an infield?
It's not fucking
And he had an infield.
God, that pisses me off.
Fuck you. It is the correct terminology to a technicality. A technicality.
Want to see him turn red? He had a P14.
U.S.
I know
rifle.
it.
No. P14 is a pattern 14 because it was designed by the Brits.
Well, it's the same design.
The U.S. model rifle of the U.S. rifle.
Is it a Model 70 if it's a 300 Winchester? Or
the
30
U.S.
aught
rifle
six?
model
Is it a different
1917 was a
variation?
different fucking rifle altogether.
It's got the same rear
fuck
sight.
off.
It's just the little hole in the middle is a little different.
It was formerly the American, but it is still an Enfield.
It's not a fucking Enfield. It's closer
It
to
is
a
the
fucking...
American Enfield.
No, it's not. No, it's not.
There's actually a very cool story
It's a
behind
fucking
this. How they were
Mauser action
manufactured.
closer to a fucking Enfield. It was designed. The pattern 14 had some engineers from the Enfield fucking whatever the fuck you call it company that helped design it. It was a British design, and apparently everything British is an Enfield. The pattern 14 was being made by fucking Eddystone, Winchester, and Remington from 1914 to 1917. Then they retooled the fucking machinery in all three of those factories, and it became the U.S. rifle model of 1917. You pick up an extra fucking round in the magazine, it's a rimless cartridge, and it was chambered for U.S., caliber 30, at that point, M1, before they went to the M2 ball ammo. It's a fucking model 1917 rifle. If you fucking held one, it's nothing like an... The only thing that's an Enfield on there is the fucking safety is similar, but it's on the wrong side of the fucking receiver.
So I have a question for
So
you,
it's
Mike.
a 1917 infield. Got it.
Mike, did they? Wasn't the standard practice for them to put 6 rounds in all of the magazines because that was they wanted to have an extra round because they're amazing.
Who are you talking to? Which one?
Mike Birch. We're getting the answer right now. So,
I think
anyway.
I think he checked out because I trolled him. So say that again.
No, because from the redesign, 303 is bigger than 30-06, and you can put 6 30-06 rounds in the magazine.
That's why I said you pick up an extra round in the
P17.
magazine. You can actually have 7 with one in the tube on a fucking 1917.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
Yes.
So
you are correct.
now, did York do that when he single-handedly took out 14,000?
He probably went out with 7 rounds. Yeah, probably.
Luger in
The
one
whole
hand
thing-
and 7 rounds from an M17.
No. If you ask everyone else, he went and picked up a 1903 because he liked it. And that's
Right.
what he
Yeah,
used.
I've heard that boomer fucking.
He traded with a Marine.
Yeah.
Yeah, he
VAR
went. He
for an
went
03.
somehow in the middle of a massive push by his unit. Stopped, walked down the street, went to a supply depot, said, "I don't like this rifle," and he picks up a 1903.
Yeah.
And then walks
The
back.
rifle
going,
he's
"Don't worry,
been
boys."
trained on since Fort Gordon.
The real
or Camp Gordon at that
reason
point.
is because if you think about it, the sights on an M17 they have ears to protect it. And
Ah,
it's really
they're more
hard to
lickable.
lick it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But a blade sight on an 03, you're good.
Yeah,
to go.
well,
So,
on
There's a reason. There's a
Shut
reason.
up, Nate. Shut up.
No,
No,
you shut up.
The 1903 was actually on your fucking packing list. If you go through the AEF's packing list, they had the fucking front sight hood on the 1903 as part of your fucking issued gear that you will have on your fucking rifle. So that's bullshit. So try.
So did he have like a brush he had to lick and then put it
Yes.
in the
He would have to.
Okay. That's
Yes.
how it would have gone. Yep. Q-tip.
I was gonna say the reason why they want to go with the 03 is so they can sell it for fucking $3,000.
No,
They'll say that Sergeant
No,
York touched
I'll tell you
this and
why.
used
Because
it.
the U.S. Army was still using it in 1940.
To be fair, I do
so-
have his rifle's number. So if you ever
Oh, really?
want to find it,
Do you know what manufacturer it was?
If you have this number, send
yeah.
it to us.
For his 1911,
verify it.
I have it because the
really?
War Department tried to find it after the war for him. They did like a whole search trying to find it.
If you can figure out who made the 1917 rifle, that would help because the serial numbers. There's 3 different.
Well, I may be wrong on it. I do know for a fact I have his
That's cool.
1911.
What was it, an Enfield or was it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, the reason, honest to God, like I said it earlier, the reason they didn't put the fucking 1917 in there is because that was a quote unquote British gun. This is America.
On a side
Well,
note,
it's called
though,
an
we do
Enfield,
have
so
They
we
put
do
the
have
Vickers in there, though. They have the Vickers machine guns in there.
I will die on that hill for the fucking 1917 versus whatever.
No,
Enfield.
I don't disagree.
we're all
with you.
very aware.
I'm just pushing your buttons because I love
All right,
doing
anyway,
it. It's
nice. At least it's got the straight bolt handle. At least it's correct.
Oh yeah,
fine.
that's
I think
right.
you did. I think you also did comment on that exact same picture last time. I think
Yeah,
you
of
said
course I
like,
did.
"Oh yeah, no, at least it's like the correct bull handle,
And
not
yeah,
fucking
it's-
straight out."
Never handled a
Ah,
rifle
there's
like
the
this
made-up
before.
scene. Yeah, look at that. Look at the soam.
Yeah, look at this some. Yeah.
Yeah, look at this.
Those deep trenches.
that.
Yeah.
Look at that irrigation
God.
ditch.
It's got fucking reinforcement and everything.
Back to the Kentucky rifle.
Oh, an actual Kentucky rifle.
I actually really want one of those.
Oh,
but
they're awesome.
Why?
Like a
I'll-
36 caliber.
I'll blow off my
Dude.
Yeah, I'll blow off my eyebrows. Though I have to get it left-handed, so otherwise I'll
Fucking
blow off
southpaw
all my
piece
I
face.
of
got my
shit.
beard blown off.
Yeah,
But yeah.
Yeah, he's got
it's
the
actually like the
rifle.
one rifle I can actually have like it in left-handed and like it be historically correct.
The 1886
All the bells.
93.
Yeah, the French troops with the
Yeah.
bells, whatever.
They're fucking awesome rifles.
We found
I
Brian
love
Brian
mine.
and I actually real quick, Mike. Did they ever make a 22 trainer?
I
for
think
LaBelle?
they did. Don't quote me on that.
Single
Don't.
shot 22 trainer.
I think
Yeah.
they at some point they did, but like I don't know.
We were at the end of one of our gaming sessions. We were sitting down with Sean and we were like looking through and we found one and we looked abnormally weird and we figured it was a
It's like a
22.
mid-
Yeah, I don't know.
LaBelle.
I can't
Yeah.
answer that with confidence. So
No worries. I just thought
Yeah,
maybe
the
you would know off the top of your
G98,
head,
yep.
so.
Now,
I'll make a soundbite of that for you, Mike. I can't answer that with confidence.
we don't we don't see it in the movie, but the actual guys that were attacking them on the hill, they would have had the 98 AZs, right?
Yeah, the Bavarian
yeah,
sappers.
sappers. Yeah. Yep.
Yep, that's right.
And they had one MG0815. Because
It was
they
like,
did find
it was just rested on the ground, right?
Yeah, they had just showed up. They didn't have time to set it up. So there was never actually any machine gun firing at them.
Just to touch on that, so like you'd mentioned, James, like in all the reports they talk about like all this crazy shooting, and that eventually turned into machine guns. But a whole unit of guys firing bolt actions at each other sounds like a fucking machine
In
gun.
a tiny ravine,
Yeah.
yeah. And in the story, the most I ever saw was like 35 machine guns. But the reality is, the sappers had one machine gun, and they did find the connectors that from the belt to prove there was one there. But there was never any like pile of casings to show there was a machine gun firing. And instead, the casings are spread out along the ridge. So what happened was these guys all show up, and they open fire. And if you have 30 odd men firing in a tiny ravine in quick succession, it can sound like a machine gun. Plus, don't forget, there was an American advance going on with actual machine guns
Yep.
on top of the
exactly.
hill and whatnot firing around. So it's a
And if
loud,
you're going through like
crazy
ravines
scenario.
and shit, the echo is gonna sound like it's right in front of
Exactly,
you. And yeah, it's like
exactly.
whatever.
It's not big, so that it makes sense for where that decision came from.
Yeah, percussion muskets. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, black powder, it go poof. Okay, there we go. Yeah, and then you have
MG08.
the MGO
Two set up there, like dual wielding.
Those are Vickers though. Those aren't fucking.
That's totally for the shot.
Yeah. Those are Vickers.
Love the sleds.
No, why are those Vickers and
The
what-
fluted.
what-
The
is it
fluted.
just like- the fluted. Oh,
shroud.
you're right. But what about this one?
They have real MG08 ends. though, I
That's
think.
an MGO.
The barrels.
But the one on the left.
Okay, but
Yeah.
that's
Oh,
the
you're right,
Vickers. Yeah. Okay.
Is it not just the reflection?
No, it's not the
Wasn't
reflection.
there
No,
a
that's
early MG08
fluted.
that was flat?
That's
The
fluted.
flash,
I think that's
no, the
fluted.
flash hider is also different. The front sights, yeah, it's. I mean, stupid details and like the grip is different. The sights on there,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, that is fluted. Vague. You can barely see it. Yeah.
Yeah, MG08s, and they should have been MG0815s without with the sled.
well, I mean, they would have had 08s if it was an actual static position.
Yeah, but it wasn't.
Right,
That's the
exactly.
issue.
Yeah, so the 0850, even that is fucking 80 something pounds of shit, and then also you have
Remember,
a team with that. Yeah, exactly.
if
oath-
you have a,
Mike,
a
you wouldn't-
machine
Mike-
gun loaded,
Mike,
ready to go with a
Asanzo?
belt. Yeah.
Mike, Asanzo is a wet dream right here.
Yeah,
man. Look at
grab
that.
the fucking machine gun and just
Yeah,
shoot
yeah,
down.
Press
yeah.
E.
Press
Yeah.
E and
done within seconds. Yeah.
yep. There's the Vickers. Yeah,
And then you got the Vickers.
Yep.
that's a later mod, but yeah.
But you can see here, it's got
Yeah,
that.
that's a
that
Vic.
little
That's
fluted-
the
fluted
I forgot the
divots, yeah.
fucking model, but like in World War One, they were yeah.
Sure.
That's very interesting.
So, you've got all these issues where, and, maybe, in the future, Michael will be able to help us shed light on what actually happened in that ravine.
Yeah, we'll call it In the Red, the real story of the tax evasion of Sgt.York. Starts with an IRS agent like knocking on a Gold Star house. It's
so should we move on to the? Okay, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that because you just said that, James. I am doing an illustration about this event, and he and Mike B are helping me get every little detail right with it. So yeah, that's a fun thing.
Maybe actually
little by little
to see it. So next time we talk about it, we can maybe show an image and say, "Hey, look, here's what the archaeology actually says about what happened."
Right.
And it's like little details here and there. So yeah, it's little tiny things that just everything has to be perfect, unlike what was depicted in the movie.
Brian, do we want to hand it off to you first?
Sure. Well, first I'd just like to say thanks so much, James, for giving us time again after fucking the idiot from Wisconsin fucks everything up.
Yeah, I'm really good at that.
Yeah,
he really is. This, that, and the other thing. But no, dude, thanks. And it was really awesome to hear the story again, and it's just every time I hear it, I'm like, I want a signed book when it comes out. Like it just,
I'm more than happy to talk about it. And I'll even put in a shameless plug. If anyone is in Kansas City in January on the 24th, I believe it will be.
We'll send Sam. He lives in Kansas City.
Yeah, on the 24th, I'll be presenting at the World War I Museum.
Oh, cool. Nice. Of October?
January.
Okay.
Literally just said January 24th.
Well, I'm also fucked up because if I remember correctly, the battle occurred in October and the
October 8th
coming up.
Yeah. So for y'all, I don't know when's this episode going to be published?
The 3rd of October. So yeah, next week.
Okay, so on October 8th, on 8 October is when I'm announcing it publicly. So.
Oh, cool. So you guys get a little early.
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah. Everyone listening gets an early.
It's 5 days.
Yeah, October 8th for the anniversary is the day I'm publicly announcing the book, because people for years have been thinking I'm just kind of full of shit and not actually writing.
First 100 order, get pre-order signed copies. There you go.
Yeah.
Now look at my website. I am not full of shit at jamesgregory.com.
Actually, it's the other16.com.
Ah, yes. But no, dude, thank you so much for joining us. And
of course,
I
appreciate it.
It's an interesting film, and I know that we kind of used it as a jumping off point to really get into the minutia of the real story, and that the film is what it is. It's a late 30s, early 40s, story about a man that did something in the First World War. Like James said, if it wasn't for the 16 guys with York, if it wasn't for York taking the role he needed to at that time, none of them would have made it out of there. So it's a very interesting, late 30s, 40s look at a depiction of the First World War. That being said, it's got a lot of pros, it's got a lot of cons. It's a really run-of-the-mill movie, in my opinion, but it's worth watching for the just conceptualizing it, like in the Second World War and how big it was for the draft, and like how a lot of guys just watched it and were like after Pearl Harbor and really did want to join the military and things. So it's very interesting to look at that point. But long story short, I mean, I'd give this movie like a 4 out of 10. Like, you should watch it for its historicalness, and it's good just to see how like World War I has been portrayed on the silver screen. But it really is a product of its time, of misconceptions, of myths, of 22 years of lies, boxed up and shoved out to the public, and in a way I wouldn't call it propaganda. I would call it like the biggest misconception ever put to film,
and then boxed up again and then shipped out even further.
Yeah, literally,
Yeah.
It's fucking crazy. So Mr. Birch, what do you think?
Yeah, like you hit a lot of the main points that I wanted to talk about, and you have to understand the historical significance of at the time this film came out. There was a war going on, we weren't involved, and it was like, okay, well, I get that and everything. And then once we got involved, like James said earlier, like then it was like, oh, I'll fucking screen this everywhere we possibly can. So I would view it as a film that was not totally based in truth, that was eventually used as propaganda, blah, blah, blah. That's also hindsight. So at the time, it was a cool war film. You see this guy that a lot of people could relate to, but it's funny because most of their target audience would not have been able to afford to go to the fucking movies and see this, right? The relatable audience of like the deep South fucking, working class people, they would have never known about this until they were drafted and probably saw this in a screening or whatnot in the military, but like, yeah, it just got so much wrong, and the fact that people knew that at the time irritates me. And so, yeah, I'm gonna give it a 3 out of 10. And the reason it's not lower is because, yeah, there was historical significance and people enjoyed it and whatever. But the reason it only gets 3 is because it just fueled the flames of the myth around this entire story for generations to come. And I know that's a hindsight approach of looking at it, but like, again, like you said, the film itself is really mediocre. Like, they didn't really put a lot of effort into the production, in my opinion. They could have. Maybe they did, but it doesn't come across as similar films from the time. But yeah, so 3 out of 10.
Who do you pass the talking pillow to?
Oh, Mike A.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like what else needs to be said at this point. But no, obviously, like I feel the same when it comes to these points. I always, when it comes to this and a lot of these older war movies, it's you know, it's an academic experience. It's not really like, you know, I'm not rating the movie based on really the quality of the movie. I'm rating the movie based on what I kind of learned about the time period in which it was made and, you know, what it all means and stuff like that. That's all interesting. The actual movie itself, yeah, it has a bunch of horse shit in it that's just, you know, dated and not not something I would consider, you know, quality. And obviously what it did for, you know, we're talking about the propaganda and the fact that it just basically twisted more facts into myths. I do have to say there is some like element to it that's like funny to me because of how dated and you know, ridiculous a lot of it is. So I don't know. I think I'm also going to give it a 3 out of 10.
Decent.
Mr. Nate.
Yeah, I mean, I remember, you know, I think I'm the only one who has actually like sat down and like fallen asleep twice to this movie.
You make that sound like that was hard to do.
Well, no, sleeping was not hard to do. Watching it was hard to do. But I mean, you know, again, it's like you always have to put these films in their own box, and you have to figure out, you know, okay, when did it come out? What is surrounding? What's the time period? What's the angle? That kind of stuff. I do agree with I think it was Mike B's thought, which was, you know, it didn't quite line up to the same time period. You know, you always have to put it within that box, but you have to then also look at it, like, where does it compare to all the other movies that we've kind of looked at and done. And, you know, we didn't really kind of talk about the movie in the beginning because we wanted to jump right into James stuff because we find that a whole lot more interesting than this fucking movie. So, you know, the thing is like, going into it, it's like we knew we all don't like it, but we have to conceptualize it. But the thing is that if you take, you know, Guadalcanal Diary, for example, and how many movies we've done since the first time we did this, you know, we've seen a lot more movies of this time, and we've seen a lot, I feel like I would have to say better movies of that time. You know, movies that really did emphasize, you know, more character, more stuff, and yet still had a propaganda-esque kind of feel to it. You know, Guadalcanal Diary is very much of that. I know it's 3 years different and a lot has changed, I think. No, 2 years difference. I know a lot has changed within those 2 years, even when the movie was made. But if you compare the two, it's like all of us as a whole liked Guadalcanal Diary a whole lot more than we like this. Am I correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
For sure. Oh yeah.
Yeah. So like just thinking of it like that, it's like it just doesn't hold up to me. And I've fallen asleep twice. Like like I know what to expect and I've fallen asleep twice. You know, so it's like it just didn't hold up. I mean, yeah. I mean, I can't rag on it for that, but you know, Mike B hit some great thoughts, and I agree with all that, particularly with, you know, the pushing of the, you know, the lies and pushing people's own agendas and saving themselves their own personal gain. And, you know, you add all that to the whole, you know, turning myth into, or I would say actually, Mike A, it's more like turning myths into facts. Because you said facts into myth. I actually look at it as myths into facts. You know, people are dead set that this is what happened and this is what's happened because it happened in a movie and, and it happened in these forms and stuff. So I think it actually is the opposite, where it's myths into facts, and people will quote it as facts. And people like James, who are saints, going in and really diving into this, because they're just turbo nerds, going into it and really looking at it and going, you are fucking wrong, and I will fight you for it. And I think those people are need to be commended more as these things have kind of being brought to light. It doesn't take away what people have done. Sergeant York, PFC York was in World War I. We can't take that away from him. But, we can fight the fact that maybe he was given a leg up post-war, and we need to, kind of, we want those facts to come to light. And I think that's more important than that. Really? Was it that bad?
It wasn't great.
I didn't even hear it.
Okay. All right. Post-war. All right. But yeah, so James, we'll hand it off to you, man. We obviously
what's your rating?
What the fuck are you doing?
Oh, sorry, crap. Dude, I'm tired, man.
Okay.
All right, it's been a long
Give
day.
your fucking rating.
Okay, 3 Scream Mel Gibsons out of 10. It sucks.
Yep.
Okay. Well,
right. Thank you.
I think I've just dealt with this movie for so long, but I do feel like I have to take a little more historical approach to it. That, I mean, the movie itself is, and I agree with Nate, it is taking fact and turning it into myth. I mean, my whole book is about the fact that Alvin York is just a legend until the movie, and that cements it as an American myth. And it's what the masses really see. And it's a new generation. But I don't think that it does annoy me, but it cannot subtract from the fact that this movie is a product of a certain moment from a certain group of people. It is a movie set just before the Americans go into the war by 2 brothers who are Jewish and who are actively making movies that are promoting this idea that America should get into the war. And Alvin York's story does in fact fit perfectly with this idea of someone who doesn't want to fight, but duty calls, and he realizes that it's bigger than he is, and then he goes to war. I mean, this movie is absolutely the perfect example of this idea of breaking the interventionist idea and getting involved because it's the right thing to do. And the movie itself does do that. I mean, even the Senate pulled it for being propaganda. But, so for this, purely for just the role this movie had, it may not be the best. It doesn't compare to, any of the movies of the time. But for what it did and what it inspired, I purely think this movie does hold up to its merits. And it is, even on whatever the list is for like significant movies of history, it's on the list. And it's for a good reason. It's not because it tells the true story of Alvin York, but because it does something in that historical moment to get people behind the war, to get people involved. And so if I take that, I would have to say, it's like a 5 or a 6 out of 10. Just purely for what it's a 6.
Okay.
But that is purely from the standpoint of how significant it actually was historically. Now, content, I'm giving it a 1. It's a 1 out of 10 for the content. All right, it is nowhere near the truth. But we're not here to determine, what the truth was. That movie, that was just a consequence of the film, right? Everyone believing a new myth, that's a consequence. It's collateral damage. But the reality is that film was designed for a specific purpose, and it accomplished that purpose very well.
Very well spoken.
So putting all of our scores into the computer that will tell us when the Vietnam War will end, we get a score of 3.8. So, I mean, only because of James.
I'm glad to help that 0.8. That's what
I'd rather watch this for 24 hours straight than Hyena Road ever again.
Yes.
Bring it back to that piece of shit. Yeah.
I would rather pound my nuts flat with a wooden mallet.
Hey, that's mine.
All right.
Soundbite
Yeah,
that.
well, I'm stealing it for that movie only. That's where I stand on that movie. Yeah.
It was bad.
God, that movie sucked ass.
But this is a very interesting film, like James said, and I touched on it a little bit. Just putting it in its time. That's the biggest thing I've learned about this podcast. It's so easy to tear shit apart if you don't understand it. And when you put it in its place, you're like, you can still tear it apart, but you get it. You get the full picture. That people do things for a certain reason. So
that's why I say these older ones are an academic experience.
Yeah, very much so. And it's interesting to see, where the point of really in the late 40s, like we were talked about in the Fixed Bayonets episode, Like that's where war movies really became what they are today. You know, beforehand it was just like the story that he also goes and does this. Like, you know, Alvin York wanted to just tell his religious Bible thumper story, and it's like nobody's gonna watch that. So they had to, you know, convince him and everything. But no, it's awesome. So again, James, you want to say where people can, you know, find you and your website and stuff? You have a Facebook page too, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I have a Facebook page, but there's also a Facebook page for The Other 16. There's a website, theother16.com. And, you know, the book comes out on December 19th from Texas A&M University Press. It's available for pre-order right now, so for anyone that wants to pre-order it. And, you know, if I'm looking forward to it, and I'm always very open to having a dialogue and discussion about it. So even if people want to send me an email through the site or something, I am more than happy to talk with anyone that wants to talk about this.
I'm a candidate for the governor of Pennsylvania, and I would like to talk to you about your film.
It almost
We
sounded,
used to talk.
It almost sounded like you were egging people on there, James. Like, yeah, come on.
I mean, look,
No,
that's
he's
the
not.
beauty of it. If you do good research, the beauty is you're never wrong because I can back everything I say.
Yeah, that's why. Like, yeah,
you
it's
know?
like, you know,
And if he can't, he'll admit it.
Yeah, and if you
You
get
know-
me, if you pull out a document signed by 16 men saying, "Hey, Alvin York was a great dude and he did everything and we all lied." Okay, fine. You have a document, we're good. But until then,
We
my
know that's not
documents
going
are
to
king.
happen.
I couldn't agree with you more, because I used to hate this until I started like making films and stuff. But it's like, unless you've been there and done it, you've done 4 fucking years of research. Like, you can be smug about it. You can be like,
Yeah.
I have the facts and I can back
Well,
everything
and also
up.
he had a discussion with us.
And hearsay.
He had a discussion with us, and we
Yeah.
asked him questions. He didn't get hostile, and he's just like, no,
blew me the
here's what
fuck
actually
away.
happened.
And it's
Holy
not
shit.
me. You know,
Right.
that's the end. It's not me. I'm just the mediator. A historian is a mediator between the document and the reality. It's not me you're
I'm
arguing
definitely not a
with.
historian then.
You're arguing with the doc. You're mad about calling him Corporal York. Don't argue with me. Argue with the War Department. Right? Here's the document. Right? This is not me just saying Alvin
No, it's all
York is
good.
not a corporal.
I'm
This
just
is
telling people that
official.
if they want to hit you up, like, it's not going to be a fucking battle. You'll just answer any questions.
Yeah,
they
no,
have.
please. I want to,
Yeah.
and that's why I'm releasing the source book,
So.
that everyone can even double check my work.
Excellent.
We got to make a movie of PhDs fighting each other over academic.
Well, he's a PhD candidate. Don't fucking agree.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Don't
Give me
don't
fucking
don't
6
go that
months.
fucking
Give
far.
me 6 months, and the next time you have me on here, Dr. Gregory can tell
Fucking-
you to suck it.
Your title's long enough, dude. Holy fuck. Like, God damn it.
Yeah,
You've
well,
earned it,
you
and
did
it's
it
awesome.
right this
So-
time.
We'll put that in
Hey.
a film.
I mean, to be fair, Nate, to be fair, you did get Brian's recording from the last one, so you can still insert
You know,
that
he's gonna
whole
do that.
section of him fucking up the intro.
I was already going to do that. Don't worry.
I love you too, Nate.
I have everyone but Mike B laughing,
There we
and
go.
I can
So
make it work.
We can
Yeah.
we could definitely insert that.
Oh
that
yeah,
was
no,
what is my-
that was good. That was going to be the top.
Just the
What am I
constant,
saying?
the
At this
constant
point,
fuck
yeah.
ups. I'm just
I have a
shaking my
book
head.
of like Nate's quotes, and the first one I love is "Don't piss off the editor."
There you go.
Yep.
Brian,
But,
sign off.
Hey guys, thanks for joining us. James are awesome. Buy this man's book. Read some real
Buy it.
fucking history. Throw out every other source for York you've ever heard of, and just this is awesome.
There
And
you go.
thanks again, dude. So
Well, thank you.
fuck yeah.
Look, this man took time to do it again.
Yes.
Say
He's a saint.
what this is. All right,
because
So,
of my
buy
ass,
his book.
Yes. we're still recording, by the way. I'm still good. I've still got shit on Audacity. Like,
Everyone's still.
we don't
moving?
know that
Everyone's
until we see
still
the
moving?
fucking file, you
I
schmuck.
got shit going.
all right. So
See the waves.
All right, let me walk James through.
Yes, please. So I make sure I don't pull a mic.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to leave a rating. Otherwise, Mel Gibson won't stop screaming. If you like this content, make sure to check out our Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram pages. If you want to directly support our work, make sure to check out our Patreon. All these links are in the description below. Until the next time, Scuttlebutt out.